And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy, in the most pleasant way, in our time together tonight. There is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story of a silence so profound, it eventually had to break, a story of a house of God that, for a little while, became an asylum. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave a comment below, just letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is there. It's nice to know where all these quiet moments are happening in the world. Alright, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing. And together, let's allow the story to begin. The door is enormous, not in a grand, cathedral sort of way, but in a heavy, final sort of way. It's made of dark, splintery oak, bound with thick black iron, and it seems to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. This is it. The end of one life and the beginning of, well, you're not entirely sure. The abyss. A woman who seems to be made of the same stern stuff as the door gives a curt nod. You take a breath that doesn't quite fill your lungs and step across the threshold. The sound the door makes as it closes behind you is a deep, resonant thump that echoes not just in the stone entryway, but somewhere deep inside your chest. The latch clicks with a sound of absolute finality. There's no turning back. You've just traded the chaotic, messy, colorful world for this quiet, ordered, monochrome existence. For the good of your soul, of course. And also because your family couldn't afford a wedding dowry. But we don't talk about that part. It's considered gauche. The air inside is cool. Even on this mild summer day, it carries a unique scent. A holy trinity of cold stone, melting beeswax, and the faintest hint of damp wool. The silence is the first thing you truly notice. It's not just an absence of noise. It's a physical presence. It presses in on you, thick and heavy like a blanket. You can feel it in your ears. Hello, dull hum. Out in the world, silence was a brief, precious commodity. Here, it's the main export. The abbess leads you through a covered walkway, a cloister, that frames a small, meticulously kept garden. Your rough leather shoes, the last piece of your old life, make a shockingly loud scuffing sound on the flagstones. You instinctively try to walk softer, to blend into the quiet. Everything here is about subduing the self. The way the other nuns you pass, shadows in dark habits, keep their eyes fixed on the floor. The way no one speaks. The way even the birds in the garden seem to chirp in a more reserved, respectable manner. This is your new home, a place where passion is a sin, and ambition is a sign of demonic influence. Your entire world has been shrunk down to these stone walls. Historians still debate just how many women who took the veil did so out of true, fervent piety, versus how many were simply out of options. A daughter with no dowry, a widow with no inheritance, a scholar with no university to attend. The convent was a respectable, if not exactly thrilling, alternative to a world that had very few places for women without a husband or a fortune. For some, it was a sanctuary. For others, a beautifully decorated cage. You're not yet sure which one it is for you. The abbess walks with a rigid posture that suggests her spine has never known the comfort of a soft chair. She doesn't look at you, but you feel her constant, no-level disapproval. She is showing you the basic geography of your new life. The scriptorium, where illuminated manuscripts are painstakingly copied. The refectory, where meals will be eaten in complete silence while one sister reads from the lives of saints. And the chapel, the cold, beating heart of the entire complex. As you pass an alcove, you see an old woman sitting on a bench. She's not wearing a habit, but simple, dark clothes. She watches you with eyes that have seen this scene play out 100 times. She gives you a small, almost imperceptible nod. This is a Corodian, a layperson who has essentially paid the convent a lump sum for a retirement plan, lifelong room and board. It's a little known fact that these holy places often doubled as elder care facilities for those who could afford it. Her presence is a strange comfort, a reminder that not everyone here is consumed by piety. Some are just here for the guaranteed meals. The abbess finally stops before a narrow wooden door, identical to a dozen others you've passed. She tells you this will be your cell, her voice flat, devoid of warmth. She informs you that your habit is on the cot. Your worldly clothes will be burned, and that vespers is in 1 hour. Do not be late. She leaves without another word, her own footsteps making almost no sound at all. You are left alone in the hallway, staring at the door that leads to your future. The weight of all that silence, all those rules, all those unsaid things, presses down. You feel a sudden, wild urge to scream, or laugh, or sing a bawdy song from your village tavern. Anything to break the crushing quiet. But you don't. You just push the door open and step inside, into the beginning of the great, holy stillness. The door to your cell groans shut, and you're plunged into a dim, grey light. The room is small. Calling it a room feels generous. It's more of a stone box, just wide enough to stretch your arms out and touch both walls, just long enough for a short cot and a tiny wooden stool. There is one window, but it's high up, more of a slit than a window, designed to let in a sliver of God's light, but not enough for you to get any distracting ideas about the outside world. This isn't a space for living, it's a space for waiting, waiting for the next prayer, the next meal, the next day, the next life. Your new life is laid out for you on the cot. A simple, rough-spun woolen habit, a plain white coif to bind your hair, and a black veil. It's a uniform designed for a rustler. Putting it on will be the final act of shedding your former self. You run a hand over the coarse fabric. It feels like poverty, like obedience. You think of the colorful ribbons and soft linen you left behind, and for a moment, the loss is a physical ache in your chest. On the floor beside the cot is a single book. It's the Rule of Saint Benedict, the foundational text for your new existence. Its pages dictate everything, from how many psalms to sing at Tour, to the proper way to hold your spoon. There is no room for interpretation. There is no room for you. You sit on the edge of the cot, the straw mattress rustling beneath you. It's a lonely, alien sound in the profound quiet. The cell is cold, the kind of deep, permeating cold that stone holds onto. You can see your breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the air. This tiny room is a microcosm of the convent itself, functional, Spartan, and designed to minimize the body in order to elevate the spirit. Or, to put it less charitably, it's a sensory deprivation chamber. Historians often speak of the piety and devotion of medieval nuns, and that was certainly true for many. But it's hard to overstate the sheer psychological pressure of this environment. Imagine every single day being almost identical to the last. The same food, the same prayers, the same view of the same stone wall. There's a strange and often overlooked aspect of monastic life. The regulation of senses. The sense of taste was suppressed by bland food. The sense of touch, by rough clothing under lack of physical contact. The sense of sight, by the drab, uniform surroundings, and the sense of hearing, by the enforced, crushing silence. Your brain, starved of new input, would be forced to turn inward, and sometimes, when it did, it found some very strange things in there. You look around your new world. The clock, the stool, the book, the rose, that's it. That's everything. There's a strange, unsettling clarity to it. All the messy complications of life have been stripped away. There are no more choices to make, beyond whether to obey or disobey. And disobedience, you suspect, comes with a very high price. You catch your own reflection in the small pail of water left for you. The face looking back is already a stranger, a girl on the brink of vanishing. You wonder about the other women here, the abbess, with her rigid certainty, the shadows who drift through the cloisters. What were their lives before? Did they come here willingly, or were they, like you, swept here by the currents of family and finance? It's a question you can never ask. To inquire about a sister's past life is forbidden. It implies a lingering attachment to the world, a spiritual flaw. You are all meant to be blank slates, sisters in Christ. Your earthly identity is washed away. There's a peculiar item some nuns were allowed, though its presence is still debated by scholars. It's called a familiar, not in the sense of a witch's demonic pet, but as a small, personal devotional object. Sometimes it was a tiny carved saint, a special rosary, or even a polished stone. It was a single, sanctioned outlet for personal attachment in a world that forbade it. You don't have one. Your only companions are the cold stone and the silent judgment of God. You begin to undress, folding your worldly clothes into a neat, sad pile. The act feels ceremonial, like a burial. You pull the rough habit over your head. It smells of lye and something vaguely earthy. It's heavy, designed to weigh you down, to constantly remind you of your vows. You bind your hair, tucking it away under the coif, hiding a part of your identity that once brought you a small, simple pleasure. Finally, the veil. It frames your face, restricting your peripheral vision, forcing you to look straight ahead, to look toward God, or more practically, toward the floor. When you look at your reflection again, you are gone. In your place is a nun, a novice, another anonymous figure in a black and white habit. You are part of the architecture now. You are a cog in the great, quiet machine of the convent. The transition is complete. Or is it? Deep down, somewhere beneath the wool and the boughs and the silence, you are still there, a flicker of the girl you were, and you have a terrifying thought. How long before that flicker goes out completely? The silence of the cell seems to offer an answer, but you can't quite make out what it's saying. A bell rings. It's not a gentle, melodic chime. It's a sharp, commanding clang that slices through the silence and seems to vibrate in your very bones. This is the sound that will now rule your life. It is the voice of God, the voice of the abyss, and the voice of your own conscience, all rolled into one insistent, metallic peal. This is the tyranny of the bell. You scramble to your feet, your heart pounding. You are warned. Do not be late. You pull open your cell door and join a silent stream of black and white figures flowing down the corridor toward the chapel. No one rushes, but there's an urgency in their movements, a practiced efficiency that you lack. You feel clumsy, awkward in your new habit, your veil slightly askew. This is Vespers, the sunset evening prayer. But it's just one of 7 canonical hours that shatter the day and night into a rigid, unyielding pattern. The monastic day doesn't follow the sun, it follows the bell. Matins will ring in the blackest part of the night, sometimes as early as 2 calling you from your straw cot to sing psalms in a freezing chapel. Then Lords at dawn, prime at the first hour of daylight, tertii at the third, sexty at midday, dawn in the afternoon, and finally Vespers, followed by Compline, the last prayer before bed. Sleep will never again be a long, uninterrupted journey. It will be a brief, rationed commodity, parceled out in short bursts between liturgical duties. The modern mind reels at the schedule. It seems designed to induce a state of perpetual, low-grade exhaustion, and perhaps that was the point. An exhausted body has less energy for sinful thoughts. A sleep-deprived mind is more pliable, more open to the divine, or to other things entirely. You find your place in the chapel, a simple wooden stall at the back, reserved for novices. The air is thick with the smell of incense and old, cold stone. The only light comes from flickering candles on the altar, casting long, dancing shadows that make the carved saints on the walls look like they're breathing. The chanting begins. It's a low, monotonous plain song, a river of Latin that flows around you. You don't know the words. Not yet, so you just stand in silence, trying to mimic the posture of the other nuns. Ramrod straight, hands tucked into their sleeves, eyes fixed on the altar. The sheer, grinding repetition of it all is staggering. The same psalms, the same prayers, the same liturgical calendar, year after year after year. This routine is the very bedrock of monastic life. It provides structure, a sense of holy purpose, but it is also a form of psychological conditioning. The bell rings, you respond, the chant begins, you join in. Your individual will is slowly, methodically subsumed into the collective rhythm of the community. There's a strange historical tidbit about this life of prayer. The ICC idea. It's often translated as sloth, but it was something more profound. The church fathers called it the noonday demon. It was a state of spiritual apathy, a soul-crushing boredom and weariness that could settle upon a monk or nun. It wasn't just laziness. It was a deep, existential despair born from the endless, unchanging cycle of the day. It was considered a grave sin, a temptation from the devil to abandon one's holy duties. But to a modern observer, it sounds a lot like clinical depression, brought on by an environment of extreme monotony and sensory deprivation. The very system designed to bring you closer to God could also, paradoxically, drain all meaning from your existence. As the prayers drone on, your mind begins to wander. You think of the setting sun outside the high chapel windows, a spectacle of color you can no longer see. You think of the sounds of a village settling down for the evening. The laughter, the clatter of pots, the barking of a dog. Here, the only sound is the unified, disembodied voice of the choir. It's beautiful in its own way, a testament to discipline and faith, but it's also profoundly lonely. You sneak a glance at the nun standing next to you. She is older, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes closed. Is she lost in ecstatic prayer, or is she just asleep on her feet? There's no way to know. Every face is a mask of pious neutrality, to show emotion, joy, sadness, boredom. Would be a crack in the perfect facade of holiness. The bell rings again, signaling the end of the service. You file out in the same silent, orderly procession and head to the refectory for the evening meal. You are reading this. You sit at a long wooden table. A bowl of thin, watery soup and a hunk of dark, heavy bread are placed before you. This is it. This is dinner. As you eat, one sister stands at a lectern and reads from a book about a saint who cheerfully endured being grilled alive. The story is meant to inspire you, to put your own small discomforts into perspective. Mostly, it just makes you lose your appetite. No one speaks. The only sounds are the scraping of spoons against wooden bowls and the droning voice of the reader. You eat as quickly as you can, your eyes fixed on your soup. The silence is not peaceful. It's loud with unspoken thoughts, with the rumbling of stomachs, with the sheer effort of so many people trying to be invisible together. Later, after compline, the final bell of the day rings. The great silence begins. From now until after prayer tomorrow morning, not a single word is to be spoken for any reason. You retreat to your cell, the cold stone box that is your world. You lie down on the rustling straw, the rough wool of your habit scratching at your skin. The silence of the convent deepens, becoming absolute. It is in this profound, pre-dawn quiet, in the liminal space between waking and sleeping, that the strangest things are often born. You close your eyes, your mind echoing with the memory of the bell, the relentless metronome of your new life. The night is a vast, silent ocean, and your cell is a tiny, solitary boat adrift upon it. Sleep doesn't come easily. The court is unforgiving, the wall habit is an itchy torment, and your mind, starved of its usual distractions, is buzzing with a nervous energy. Every tiny sound, the scuttling of a mouse in the walls, the distant hoot of an owl, is amplified into a startling event. You drift in undoubt of a shallow, restless slumber, the kind that offers no real rest at all. Then the bell for matins rings. It's a violent assault on the stillness, a summons from the dead of night. It feels like a punishment. You stumble out of your cot, your limbs heavy, your head thick with sleep, joining the other shadowy figures. You make your way back to the chapel. The air is so cold it feels sharp in your lungs. This, you think, is the true test of faith. Not martyrdom, not grand miracles, but the simple, brutal act of waking up in the freezing dark to chant psalms you barely understand. The service is a surreal affair. The chapel is lit by a single candelabra, the flames swaying and creating a disorienting dance of light and shadow. The faces of the other nuns are pale and drawn in the gloom. Their voices are thick with sleep, the plain song more of a low, automatic hum than a joyful noise. You're certain at least half the women here are praying with their eyes closed, not out of spiritual ecstasy, but because they are simply trying not to fall over. You are in that strange, hypnotic state of near exhaustion, where the world takes on a dreamlike quality. The rhythmic chanting, the flickering light, the biting cold, it all conspires to unmoor you from reality. Your mind is a fertile ground for anything. And then it happens. It's not a loud sound. In the cacophony of a city street, you would never have noticed it. But here, in the absolute, disciplined quiet of the matin service, it is as shocking as a thunderclap. From somewhere in the rows of stalls in front of you, a single, distinct sound cuts through the sacred chant. Meow. It's soft, but unmistakable. It's not a human imitation of a cat, not a playful meow. It sounds, for all the world, like an actual cat. A small, slightly plaintive one. The chanting falters for a fraction of a second. You see a few heads turn, a few pairs of eyes widen in the candlelight. You freeze, your own throat suddenly tight. Did you imagine it? In your sleep-deprived state, it's entirely possible. Your mind could be playing tricks on you, conjuring a familiar sound from a world you've left behind. The abbess, positioned at the front, does not react. Her voice continues the chant, perhaps a fraction of a decibel louder, a stern, unwavering anchor in the sudden sea of confusion. The other nuns, following her lead, pick up the rhythm again. The moment of disruption is smoothed over, casted back into the seamless whole of the liturgy. It was nothing, a trick of the light, a mouse, the wind. But it wasn't. You know what you heard, and you know, from the subtle, rigid tension that has now entered the chapel, that everyone else heard it too. The air is different now. It's charged with a question that hangs unspoken in the incense-laden air. What was that? And, more importantly, who was that? The rest of the service is a blur. The prayers are completed, the psalms are sung, but the underlying focus has shifted. Every nun is now an unwilling detective, straining her ears, not for the word of God, but for a repeat of that small, profane sound. It doesn't come. The service ends, and you file out in the pre-dawn gloom, the silence heavier than ever before. Back in your cell. You can't get the sound out of your head. It was so small, so mundane, yet so utterly bizarre in this context. A cat. Why a cat? Cats were common enough in the outside world, tolerated for their ability to keep granaries free of mice. But they were also viewed with suspicion. They were creatures of the night, solitary and independent, in an age that saw omens in everything. A cat's cry in the dead of night, in the middle of a holy service, could be interpreted in a dozen unsettling ways. Theologians of the time held some very specific, and to us, very strange, beliefs about animals, while street Francis preached to the birds. Other thinkers were less charitable. They debated whether animals had souls, whether they could be agents of the devil. A famous, though lightly apocryphal, story tells of a rooster being put on trial and executed for the unnatural act of laying an egg. In a world where the supernatural was woven into the fabric of daily life, an animal's sound where no animal should be was not just a curiosity. It was a potential breach. a crack in the holy wall separating the sacred from the profane. You lie on your cot, staring up at the stone ceiling, waiting for the bell for Lords to ring. But you are no longer listening for the bell. You are listening for something else, a small, soft sound that has planted a seed of chaos in the heart of order. The silence of the convent has been broken, not by a scream, or a laugh, or a word of rebellion, but by a meow, and you have the distinct, chilling feeling that this is only the beginning. The next day is a study in strained normalcy. The bells ring on schedule. The prayers are chanted. The silent meals are consumed. On the surface, nothing has changed. But underneath, the entire convent is holding its breath. The memory of that small, strange sound hangs in the air. A collective, unspoken secret. You watch the other nuns as you go about your duties. You're assigned to the herb garden today, a task that involves a lot of kneeling and pulling up weeds. It's tedious work, but it gives you a chance to observe. Everyone keeps their eyes downcast, their faces impassive, as the rule dictates. But you see the little things. A flicker of a glance between two older sisters as they pass in the cloister. A novice who drops her basket of laundry, her hands trembling slightly. The way everyone seems to startle just a little bit more whenever a door creaks or a floorboard groans. The abbess is a fortress of denial. At the midday meal, she has the reader choose a passage about the virtues of discipline and the devil's cunning tricks to sow discord through trivial distractions. The message is clear. What you heard last night was nothing. A temptation to be ignored. To speak of it would be to give it power. To acknowledge the crack is to widen it. But silence is a funny thing. In a place so saturated with it, any disruption takes on an enormous significance. And when you're forbidden from speaking about that disruption, it doesn't just disappear, it metastasizes. It grows in the quiet, fertile ground of imagination and anxiety. You find yourself constructing elaborate theories. Was it a prank? A desperate cry for attention? A genuine moment of madness? Or the most terrifying thought of all, was it not human at all? Was there, somehow, a cat trapped in the chapel walls? During your work in the garden, you tried to identify the culprit. You studied the faces of the sisters who were sitting in the front rows. Sister Agnes, stern and pious, who seems incapable of such a sound. Sister Isabel, young and prone to fits of weeping, who was sent to the convent after a scandalous romance. Sister Mathilde, a quiet, older woman who moves like a ghost and rarely seems to notice the world around her. It could be any of them. It could be none of them. This phenomenon, where a group of people becomes fixated on an unexplained event, is not unique to medieval convents. Think of modern office environments, where a single, ambiguous email from management can spawn a week of whispered speculation and anxiety. The human brain abhors a vacuum of information. When we don't have facts, we create narratives, and in the high-pressure, low-stimulus environment of the convent, these narratives could become incredibly potent. You find a stray catmint plant among the thyme and rosemary. As you pull it up, the sharp, minty scent fills the air. You think of the cats in your village, how they would roll in patches of it in pure, unthinking bliss. It feels like a small, strange omen. The historical record is filled with odd, localized hysterias, but what makes the convent cases so fascinating is the closed-loop system. There was no escape. You couldn't just go home and forget about the weird thing your co-worker did. You had to live with it, eat with it, pray with it, 24 hours a day. The tension had nowhere to go but inward, building and building like steam in a sealed pot. There's a curious, related concept from the period that was considered a serious offense in a monastery or convent. It wasn't loud talking. It meant the quiet, whispered complaints and gossip that could erode the unity of the community. Theologians saw it as the devil's preferred method of attack, not a frontal assault, but a subtle, creeping poison. The abbess's strict silence on the Meow incident is a direct attempt to prevent this, but her strategy is backfiring. By refusing to address the mystery, she is making it infinitely more powerful. It has become a silent, collective obsession. As you kneel in the dirt, pulling weeds, you feel a pair of eyes on you. It's Sister Mathilde. The quiet one. She is standing by the cloister wall, ostensibly examining the climbing roses, but you can feel her gaze. Her face is, as always, a blank mask, but her eyes, there's something in them. A flicker of what? Fear, amusement, recognition. The moment hangs there, suspended in the heavy afternoon air. Then, she turns and drifts away, as silent as she arrived. The encounter leaves you more unsettled than before. The ripple from that single meow is spreading, not in sound, but in silence. It's in the shirt, sideways glances. It's in the rigid set of the abbess's jaw. It's in the sudden, sharp attention everyone pays to the slightest noise. The convent is a bell jar, and a strange, invisible pressure is building inside it. The community is a tightly wound string, and you get the feeling that one more unexpected vibration could cause it to snap. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the garden. It's almost time for vespers. Time to return to the chapel, the scene of the crime, and to wait, with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity, to see what the night will bring. The chapel feels different tonight. The air is thick with anticipation, a stark contrast to the usual sleepy resignation of vespers. Every sister who enters seems to carry the same invisible burden of expectation. You take your place in the novice's stall, your back straight, your hands clammy inside your sleeves, your senses feel heightened, unnaturally sharp. You're not just listening, you're hunting for a sound. The chanting begins. The familiar Latin phrases washing over the room. For the first few minutes, everything is normal. The voices rise and fall in their accustomed rhythm. You almost start to relax. Maybe it was a one-time event, a brief, inexplicable crack in the monastic facade, now sealed over. Maybe the abbess's iron will has triumphed. You can tell she thinks so. From her place at the front, she leads the prayers with a renewed, forceful confidence. Her voice is a clear, strong thread, pulling the rest of the choir along, daring anyone to deviate. Then, you see it. A few rows ahead of you, a woman's shoulders begin to shake. Just a slight tremor at first, almost imperceptible. It's Sister Isabel, the young, emotional one. Her head is bowed low, her face hidden in the shadow of her coif. You see her hands, clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. She looks like she is fighting a great, internal battle. And she is losing. A sound escapes her lips. It's not a word, not a gasp. It's a choke, desperate noise, as if she tried to swallow a word and it came out wrong. But the sound is familiar. Me-D-R-W. This time it's not soft or plaintive. It's louder, sharper, laced with a strange, frantic energy. It cuts through the sacred chant like a shard of glass. The singing stops. Not just falters, but stops completely. The only sound in the vast, cold chapel is the echo of that single, mad syllable, and the sharp, angry intake of breath from the abbess. Every head turns towards Sister Isabel. She keeps her face hidden, her body trembling violently now, as if in the grips of a seizure. The silence stretches out, thin and brittle. It's a moment of pure, undiluted crisis. The unspoken has become spoken. The madness is out in the open. And then, the truly astonishing thing happens. The nun standing next to you, a stout, middle-aged woman named Sister Clement, who you always thought of as a piece of solid, sensible furniture, fidgets. Her eyes are wide, fixed on Sister Isabel, her mouth open slightly. You think she is going to gasp, or whisper a prayer. Instead, a tiny, hesitant sound emerges from her throat. Meow. It's quiet, questioning. It's the sonic equivalent of a tentative step into a dark room. It's an echo, a response, and it changes everything. If Sister Isabel's meow was a spark, Sister Clement's is the kindling catching fire. It's no longer a solitary act of madness. It's a conversation, a contagion. The absurdity has found a partner. The abbess rises to her full, imposing height. Silence. She commands, her voice like the crack of a whip. For a moment, it works. The shock of her direct intervention freezes everyone in place. Sister Clement looks horrified, as if she can't believe the sound just came from her own mouth. Sister Isabel continues to tremble, but she is quiet. But the spell is broken. The dam has been breached. The madness, once contained in a single person, has now tasted freedom. It has jumped from one host to another. Historians and psychologists have a term for this, a shared psychotic disorder, or folie à deux, the madness of two. But what happens when it becomes folie à trois, or folie en masse? The conditions in the convent were a perfect petri dish for this kind of psychological contagion. In a group of people who have suppressed their individuality to an extreme degree, who are living under immense stress and deprivation, the boundaries of the self can become porous. One person's powerful emotional state can bleed into another's, especially when it's an emotion, like panic or hysteria, that has no acceptable outlet. There's a strange, less-known aspect of medieval group dynamics called the communal emotional standard. Every community, whether a guild, a village, or a convent, had an unwritten code of acceptable emotions. In the convent, the standard was pious serenity. Grief, anger, even loud joy were all off-key. When an emotion that violates the standard erupts, it's deeply destabilizing, but if that forbidden emotion is powerful enough, it can sometimes reset the standard for the entire group, at least for a little while. The abbess, her face a mask of cold fury, points a trembling finger at Sister Isabel, ordering her to herself for penance and silence until summoned. Then she points to Sister Clement, telling her she will join Isabel. The two women stumble out of the chapel, one weeping, the other looking utterly bewildered. The abbess turns back to the rest of you. We will begin the litany of humility, from the beginning. She restarts the chant, her voice strained. But the magic is gone. The unified choir is now just a collection of individual, frightened women. You can hear the tremor in their voices. You can feel the furtive glances darting around the room. The question is no longer if it will happen again. The question is who will be next. And a deeper, more terrifying question begins to form in the back of your own mind. What would it take for that sound to come out of your mouth? The abbess's punishment is swift and severe. Sister Isabel and Sister Clement are confined to their cells, their meals reduced to bread and water. They are assigned extra prayers, to be recited kneeling on the cold stone floor. The goal is to make an example of them, to cauterize the wound before the infection can spread. It has the opposite effect. By isolating the sick, the abbess unwittingly makes them objects of intense fascination and, strangely, a kind of covert admiration. They have done the unthinkable. They have broken the great silence. They have given voice to the frantic, chaotic energy that everyone else was holding tightly in their chests. The next morning, as you file past the isolation cells on your way to chapel, you hear it. A low, continuous meowing coming from behind Sister Isabel's door. It's not a cry for help. It's a steady, rhythmic, almost meditative sound. And from Sister Clement's cell, a few doors down, you hear the faint, answering call. They have created their own private, forbidden liturgy. Within a day, a third sister succumbs, doing silent work in the scriptorium, a place of ultimate quiet concentration. An older nun named Sister Marie, who had been painstakingly copying the psalm, suddenly drops her quill. She stares at the half-finished golden letter D on the page, her eyes widened unfocused. Then she opens her mouth and lets out a long, howling yowl, like a tomcat on a fence at midnight. This time, there's no hesitation. From across the room, another nun answers with a series of sharp, staccato mews. Within a minute, 5 or 6 of the 20 nuns in the room are meowing. Some are doing it while still trying to work, their hands trembling as they paint, a bizarre soundtrack accompanying their holy tales. Others have abandoned their work entirely, rocking back and forth in their chairs, lost in the sound. It's happening. The absurdity is going viral. What you are witnessing is a classic, if bizarre, case of mass psychogenic illness. It's a phenomenon where symptoms of a disease spread throughout a cohesive social group, despite there being no infectious agent. The illness is real. The people are genuinely experiencing the symptoms, but its cause is psychological, not biological. It almost always occurs in closed, high-stress environments where people feel they have no power or agency. A school, a factory floor, a military barracks, or a medieval convent. The symptoms are often dramatic and strained, a physical manifestation of a psychological distress that has no other way to express itself. You stand frozen in the doorway of the scriptorium, a basket of clean rags in your hands. The scene is utterly surreal. It's like walking into a dream. The sight of these pious, disciplined women, who have dedicated their lives to silence and order, now caterwauling like a barn full of cats, is profoundly unsettling. It's comical, but it's also terrifying. The rules that hold your world together are visibly dissolving. A lesser known, but fascinating, parallel can be found in what were called the dancing plagues of the late Middle Ages. The most famous case was in Strasbourg in 1518, where a woman began to dance uncontrollably in the street. Within a month, hundreds had joined her, dancing for days on end, seemingly without reason, until they collapsed from exhaustion. Authorities at the time were baffled, attributing it to hot blood or divine wrath. Modern scholars see it as another form of mass hysteria, a response to famine, disease, and extreme social anxiety. The body finds a way to act out the mind's hidden panic. Here, in your convent, the panic isn't expressing itself through dancing feet, but through vocal cords. The abbess arrives, her face pale with fury. She is losing control, and she knows it. Her authority, once absolute, is being challenged not by reasoned argument or open rebellion, but by something far more insidious. Sheer, nonsensical chaos. You cannot reason with a meow. You cannot debate a yaw. Stop this, she bellows, her voice echoing in the high silencing room. This is the devil's work. You are inviting demons into this holy house. Her words have some effect. A few of the women fall silent, looking ashamed and frightened, but for others, her accusation only seems to fuel the fire. Sister Marie looks directly at the abbess and lets out a defiant hiss. It's a shocking, insubordinate act. The fear of demonic possession, which was meant to scare them into silence, is perversely becoming a justification for their behavior. If they are already possessed, then they are no longer responsible for their actions. It's a psychological get-out-of-jail-free card. By the end of the week, the contagion has consumed nearly half the convent. The meowing is no longer a sporadic event. It has become a parallel ritual. During the solemnity of the Sun Mass, a counter-chorus of mews and purrs will rise from the congregation. During the silent meals in the refectory, the reader's voice will be drowned out by a cacophony of feline cries. You have managed to remain silent. You watch it all with a kind of clinical, horrified detachment, but it's getting harder. The sheer peer pressure is immense. When you are in a room where half the people are engaged in a bizarre, collective behavior, the most difficult thing in the world is to be the one who is not. There's a primal human urge to belong, to mirror the actions of the group. Even when those actions are completely irrational, you find yourself clenching your jaw during prayers. A part of your brain strangely tempted to join the chorus, just to release the unbearable tension. The question of why are they doing this is slowly being replaced by a much more personal and frightening question. How much longer until I do it too? The abbess is a ship captain in a storm, trying to steer with a broken rudder. Her first strategy, targeted punishment, was a spectacular failure. Now, She shifts tactics. If punishment doesn't work, perhaps piety will. She declares a convent-wide regimen of increased austerity. The contagion, she reasons, is a spiritual sickness born of hidden pride and lax devotion. The cure must therefore be an overdose of holiness. The bells begin to ring more often. Extra prayer services are added, including a nightly vigil of penitential psalms. The already meager meals in the refectory become even more sparse. The bread is harder, the soup thinner. She even introduces a new rule. For 1 hour each afternoon, every nun must kneel on the stone floor of her cell and meditate on the torments of hell. The logic is clear. If you are sufficiently terrified of eternal damnation, you'll have no time for earthly madness. This is a classic case of misdiagnosing the disease. The abbess sees a spiritual failing, a lack of discipline. A modern psychologist would see a group of women suffering from the effects of extreme stress, malnutrition, sleep deprivation, and sensory monotony. The abbess is, in fact, a massive dose of the very poison that caused the sickness in the first place. She is trying to put out a fire with gasoline, and the convent explodes. The new rules, meant to restore order, push the remaining sane nuns closer to the breaking point. The exhaustion is now bone deep, the hunger a constant, gnawing presence. The line between the Meowing sisters and the silent sisters begins to blur. A nun will be standing in chapel, reciting a prayer, and then a strange, involuntary squeak will escape her lips. She'll clap a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, but the seal has been broken. The 1 hour of forced meditation on hell is a particular disaster. You kneel in your cell, the cold of the stones seeping into your knees, trying to conjure images of fire and torment as instructed. But the mind, under this much pressure, doesn't always obey. The enforced silence, combined with the terrifying subject matter, creates a perfect breeding ground for anxiety. Your thoughts begin to spiral. The silence becomes a roaring in your ears. The darkness behind your closed eyes starts to feel like it's squirming. You feel a scream building in your throat, and you have to bite your own lip, tasting blood, just to keep it down. You wonder how many other sisters, alone in their cells, are fighting the same battle. Some are losing. From down the corridor, you hear it begin. A low growl, then a series of frantic mews, a physical manifestation of the mental torment they've been forced to dwell on. There's a fascinating and slightly bizarre historical practice that mirrors the abbess's logic. It's called spiritual medicine. Some medieval physicians and theologians believed that certain sins directly caused physical ailments. For instance, envy could cause jaundice, and wrath could cause a fever. The prescription, therefore, wasn't a herb or a potion, but a prayer or a penitential act. A priest might prescribe 3 Hail Marys for a headache. The abbess is practicing a large-scale version of this, prescribing a bitter cocktail of prayer and fasting for a sickness of the soul. But she has it backwards. It's not a sick soul making the body meow. It's a sick environment making the soul scream in the only language it has left. The situation becomes a grim, farcical routine. The abbess will command silence, and for a few minutes, the convent will obey, the air crackling with the effort of suppression. Then, a single, renegade meow will break the truce, and like a single raindrop that heralds a downpour, it will be followed by another, and another, until the entire building is once again filled with the unholy choir. The few remaining silent nuns, yourself included, now exist in a state of constant, high-alert anxiety. You find yourselves developing little tics, coping mechanisms. You hum constantly under your breath, just to fill the silence in your own head. You focus with furious intensity on your manual labor, scrubbing floors, kneading dough, using the physical exertion to drown out the chaos around you, then the chaos threatening to erupt within you. You are no longer afraid of the nuns who meow. You are afraid of the part of yourself that understands them, the part of you that is also exhausted, and hungry, and lonely, and trapped, the part of you that recognizes the sheer, liberating release and just letting go. In making a sound that has no meaning, no purpose, and is therefore free from the crushing weight of piety and expectation. One evening, during the silent meal, you watch the abbess. She sits at her elevated table, her face like a thundercloud, pretending to eat her bread and water. She does not look at her flock. She does not acknowledge the cacophony rising from the long tables below her. She is the image of absolute, rigid denial. But you see her hand, the one resting on the table, trembling uncontrollably. She, too, is breaking. The pressure is becoming too much for the container to bear. Her system of prayer and punishment has failed. The madness is now the new order. The transformation is complete. The Meowing is no longer a disruption of the daily routine. It is the daily routine. What began as a single, shocking crack in the silence has now become a defining feature of your life. The convent has developed its own bizarre, parallel liturgy. The morning bell from a team still rings in the freezing dark. You and the other sisters still file into the chapel, but the service itself has become a strange, hybrid creature. The abbess and a few loyal, terrified older nuns will begin the plain song, their voices thin and dreary in the cavernous space. And then, the response will come. It's not immediate. It builds slowly. A few soft mews from the back rows, like kittens waking up. A deeper, more resonant purr from the center of the choir. Then, a sharp yawl from a sister near the front. Within minutes, the chapel is filled with what can only be described as a feline symphony. There are the high-pitched, insistent mews of hungry cats, the low, contented rumbles, the sharp hisses of confrontation, and the lone, mournful why owls of the night. Each nun seems to have developed her own unique vocalization, her own feline persona. Sister Isabel, the first to be afflicted, often climbs onto her stool, perching on the narrow wooden seat like a cat on a fence post, and lets out a series of surprisingly realistic, piercing cries. Sister Clement, who had been so sensible, now often gets down on her hands and knees and rubs against the legs of the stalls, purring loudly. You and a handful of other silent sisters are the unwilling audience. You try to pray, you try to focus on the Latin, on the flickering candles, on the face of the stone Madonna, but it's impossible. The sheer, overwhelming absurdity of it all is a constant distraction. It's like trying to meditate in the middle of a carnival. Some historians argue about the true nature of these performances. Were the nuns completely lost in a dissociative state, unaware of their actions, or was there a sliver of consciousness, a part of them that was, in some way, choosing to participate in this mass protest of the soul? The truth is likely somewhere in between, a murky territory of coercion and complicity. The surrealism extends beyond the chapel. At midday, the sisters will gather in the cloister for their 1 hour of permitted recreation. Before the plague, this time was for quiet walking and contemplative conversation. Now, it resembles a scene from a madhouse. Women chase each other through the garden, batting at each other with their hands like kittens. Others will simply find a patch of sun on the flagstones, curl up, and nap, twitching and purring in their sleep. The most unnerving part is how normal it has become to you. The first time you saw a nun lapping water from a bowl on the floor, you were horrified. Now, you barely register it. Your mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, has normalized the madness. This is just what life is now. Your world is a place where holy women meow. There's a little-known psychological principle called semantic satiation. If you say a word over and over again, it eventually loses its meaning and just becomes a sound. Chair, 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 chair. After a while, the connection between the sound and the object breaks down. In a way, the convent is experiencing a kind of ritual satiation, the endless repetition of prayers and psalms, meant to be profoundly meaningful, heard, for some, become just a series of sounds. The Meowing, in its own strange way, is a new sound, a new ritual. It has no prescribed meaning. which gives it a bizarre kind of power. It is a rebellion against semantics itself. You are put on kitchen duty, one of the few places where a semblance of the old order remains. Mostly because if the bread doesn't get baked, everyone starves. You work alongside to other sisters who, like you, have remained untouched by the feline fever. You work in silence. But it's a different kind of silence now. It's not the peaceful, contemplative silence of the rule. It's a tense, conspiratorial silence. We the sane silence. One of your kitchen partners is a very old nun named Sister Helene. She has been in the convent for over 60 years. She is small and wizened, and her hands are gnarled with arthritis. But she still kneads dough with a surprising strength. One afternoon, as the distant sound of the feline matins drifts in from the chapel, you dare to look at her. You expect to see fear or disgust. Instead, you see a deep, profound sadness. She catches your eye. She leans in close. Her voice a dry whisper, violating the rule of silence. Their souls are so very tired, she says. And then she goes back to kneading her dough. Her words hit you with the force of a physical blow. It's the first time anyone has offered an explanation beyond the devil, and it makes a terrifying kind of sense. This isn't about demons or madness. It's about exhaustion. A form of spiritual and psychological burnout so profound that the human mind simply breaks. Or rather, it finds a new, albeit strange, way to cope. It retreats from the impossible demands of sainthood into the simpler, more honest world of an animal. A cat doesn't have to worry about the state of its soul. A cat just is. It sleeps. It eats. It me was. In a world of unbearable pressure. Perhaps that is the most tempting escape of all. The situation inside the convent has spiraled from a crisis into a new, bizarre status quo. But a convent does not exist in a vacuum. It is a sealed-off world, but one with permeable walls. And the abbess, faced with a rebellion she cannot crush from within, makes a fateful decision. She doubles down on containment. She orders the great iron-studded main gate to be barred from the inside. The smaller postern gates are locked and bolted. No one is to enter. And more importantly, no one is to leave. Her reasoning is a mixture of shame and fear. The scandal is already out of control within these walls. She cannot allow it to infect the world outside. The reputation of their holy order, and by extension the reputation of the church itself, is at stake. She is trying to hide the sickness, to put a lid on the simmering pot. But by sealing the gates, she transforms the convent from a sanctuary into a prison. A prison where the inmates are also the guards, and the madness is trapped inside with you. The physical act of barring the gates is a somber, terrifying ceremony. To lay brothers, their faces grim and confused, slide the huge iron bar into place. The sound it makes, a deep, groaning scrape of metal on metal, is a sound of utter finality. It's the sound of the door closing on your tomb. The psychological effect is immediate and profound. Before, even if you never left, the possibility of leaving existed. The world was still out there. Now, it's gone. The last sliver of connection to your old life has been severed. The world has been reduced to this closed circuit of stone, prayer, and Meowing. This creates a perfect pressure cooker environment. In psychology, there's a concept called the island effect. When a group is isolated, cut off from outside contact, their internal dynamics become magnified. Small quirks become obsessive rituals. Minor disagreements can fester into major schisms. And a shared delusion can become an unshakable, all-encompassing reality. You are now living on Hysteria Island. The days take on a surreal, dreamlike quality. The sun rises and sets outside your stone world, but it feels like a distant, irrelevant fact. Time is measured not in hours, but in the ebb and flow of the collective mania. There are the quiet times, usually after a meal, when the sisters seem exhausted, many of them sleeping in corners or curled up on the chapel floor. And then there are the loud times, often at dusk or in the dead of night, when the convent erupts into a frenzied cacophony that seems to make the very stones vibrate. You and the other silent ones have become ghosts in your own home. You move through the corridors, performing your duties, trying to be invisible. You learn the patterns of the afflicted. You know which hallways to avoid, which sisters are prone to sudden hissing fits, and who is most likely to try and pounce on you from behind a pillar. It's a constant, low-level state of vigilance that is exhausting in its own right. There's a strange and little documented aspect to some of these historical mass hysterias, the creation of a leader or patient zero, who often sets the tone for the delusion. In your convent, Sister Isabel remains the unofficial queen of the cats. Her mews are the most dramatic, her movements the most feline. The other sisters seem to take their cues from her. When she is agitated, the whole convent is agitated. When she is calm, a relative peace settles over the group. It's as if she is the conductor of this mad orchestra. Scholars still debate whether these leaders were conscious of their role, or if they were simply the most deeply submerged in the shared psychosis. One afternoon, you run out of flour in the kitchen. The main storeroom is on the other side of the cloister garden. To get there, you have to cross the open space where the recreation is happening. You take a deep breath and step outside. The scene is like a painting by a madman. A dozen nuns are scattered around the usually pristine garden. Two are sharpening their claws on the trunk of a pear tree. Another is trying to catch a butterfly, leaping into the air with a surprising, nun-like agility. Sister Isabel is perched on the rim of the central well, looking down at her reflection, letting out a series of soft, questioning mews. You walk quickly, your eyes fixed on the path, your heart hammering in your chest. You are an alien here, a tourist in a land of madness. As you pass the well, Sister Isabel turns her head. Her eyes meet yours. For a fleeting second, the wild, unfocused look is gone. You see a flicker of the girl she used to be, a flicker of pure, undiluted terror, and then it's gone. Submerged again beneath the feline facade, she hisses at you, a sharp, angry sound, and turns back to her reflection. That moment haunts you. It suggests that deep down, under the layers of hysterical behavior, the person is still in there, trapped, a prisoner in her own body, forced to watch herself perform these bizarre, involuntary actions. The idea is more terrifying than any demonic possession. A demon can be exorcised, but how do you exorcise yourself? You get the flour and hurry back to the relative sanity of the kitchen, bolting the door behind you. You lean against the rough wood, breathing heavily. The abbess thought she was locking the madness in, but what she has really done is lock you in with it. There is no escape. The barred gates are a constant, physical reminder that you are on your own. You must either succumb to the madness or find a way to survive it. And as you listen to the howls and mews from the garden, you are no longer entirely sure which would be easier. An iron gate is a formidable barrier, but it is no match for a good story. The abbess may have sealed the convent physically, but she could not seal the cracks through which whispers travel. The very act of barring the gates, a dramatic and unprecedented measure, was itself a kind of announcement. It screamed, something is wrong in here. The first leaks come from the lay brothers who work the convent's outer fields and deliver supplies. They are left outside the bolted gates now, passing vegetables and sacks of grain through a small, guarded hatch. They can hear it. At first, it's just a faint, confusing noise carried on the wind. But soon, it becomes unmistakable. The sounds coming from the house of God are not the sounds of prayer. They are the sounds of 1,000 stray cats. The brothers, simple men of the earth, don't know what to make of it. They cross themselves, muttering about witchcraft and devils. When they return to the village at the end of the day, they talk. They gather in the single, smoky tavern, their voices low, their eyes wide. But sisters, they say, they have been afflicted. They meow like beasts. The devil has made a nest in the house of the Lord. The story spreads through the village like fire in a dry field. At first, It's met with disbelief. The nuns of the local convent were figures of remote, austere piety. The idea of them behaving in such a way is ludicrous. But the story is too specific, too strange, to be dismissed entirely. Curiosity, a powerful and often morbid force, takes hold. Soon, the villagers start to invent reasons to pass by the convent walls. A farmer claims his best goat has wandered off in that direction. A woman decides the most direct path to the well is the one that skirts the convent's property. They walk slowly, their heads cocked, straining to hear something, anything, over the stone barrier. And sometimes, they are rewarded. A gust of wind will carry the sound, a faint but distinct chorus of meows, and they will scurry away, thrilled and terrified, with a story to tell. The convent becomes a local legend, a source of fear and morbid entertainment. Parents tell their children that if they don't behave, the meowing nuns will get them. Young men dare each other to spend a night camped out near the walls. The devil's quiet, they start to call it. This process, where a real event is transformed into folklore, is a constant throughout history. The original facts become distorted and exaggerated with each retelling, shaped by the fears and beliefs of the community. The historical kernel of truth, a group of women suffering a psychological breakdown, is buried under layers of supernatural fantasy. Scholars who study the transmission of legends call this the snowball effect. A small, rolling snowball of a story picks up more and more material as it travels, eventually becoming a massive, unrecognizable avalanche of myth. Inside the walls, you are completely unaware of your newfound fame. Your world remains the sealed-in, surreal bubble of your daily existence, but you start to notice things. Sometimes, when you are working in the high-walled herb garden, a pebble will fly over the wall and land in the dirt. It's a sign that someone is out there, watching, listening. The thought is deeply unsettling. You were supposed to have retreated from the world, to be hidden from its gaze. Now, you have become a spectacle, a freak show. One of the few remaining points of contact with the outside is the turn. It's a clever piece of monastic technology, a revolving cylindrical cupboard built into the wall. You could place something on a shelf on the inside, a basket of eggs, a finished manuscript, and a person on the outside could rotate it to retrieve the item, all without either party seeing the other. It was designed to preserve the nun's separation from the world. Now, it has become a conduit for gossip. When you deliver a basket of convent baked bread to the turn, you can sometimes hear the muffled voices of the village women on the other side. They're not talking about the weather or the price of wool. They're talking about you. Did you hear it today? Louder than ever. God have mercy on their souls. There's a curious, little-known detail about the economics of convents. Many, like yours, were not entirely self-sufficient. They relied on selling goods, embroidery, baked goods, herbal remedies, to the local community to survive. The abbess, in her shame, has tried to keep up appearances, to continue these transactions as if nothing is wrong. But the business is suffering. People are now afraid of the convent's products. They whisper that the bread might be cursed, that the herbs are tainted by diabolical influence. The convent's isolation, meant to protect its reputation, is now threatening its very survival. The abbess remains steadfast in her denial. She refuses to acknowledge the sounds the villagers hear, refuses to answer the fearful questions of the lay brothers. She is trying to maintain a crumbling facade of normalcy against an overwhelming tide of chaos. But the whispers have reached beyond the village. They have traveled down the muddy roads to the nearby market town, and soon, they will reach the ears of someone who cannot be ignored. Someone whose job it is to deal with rumors of devils and madness in the flock. The local priest. The outside world is about to come knocking, and the abbess will have no choice but to answer the door. The news, as it inevitably does, reaches the ears of Father Michel. He is the priest of the local parish, a man whose spiritual world is usually confined to baptisms, burials, and mediating disputes over wandering pigs. He is a practical, Slightly paunchy man, more administrator than mystic. The idea of demonic possession is something HES read about in books, a dramatic affair for bishops and saints, not for a sleepy rural parish like his. When the first reports of the Meowing nuns reach him, he dismisses them as fanciful village gossip, the product of too much cheap wine and idle minds. He has known the abbess for years. She is a stern, pious woman, perhaps a bit too fond of her own authority, but the convent she runs is a model of order and devotion. The stories are, on their face, absurd. But the stories don't stop. They grow more detailed, more insistent. The lay brothers who work the convent's lands come to him, their faces pale, begging him to do something. Finally, a delegation of worried village elders formally requests his intervention. His flock is spooked. Tithes are down. People are afraid to pass the convent on their way to church. Gossip is turning into genuine spiritual anxiety, and that is his department. With a heavy sigh and a deep sense of foreboding, he knows he can no longer ignore it. He sends a message to the abbess, a polite but firm noting his intention to visit and inspect the convent, to quiet the slanderous rumors that are troubling the faithful. It is a request she cannot refuse. A priest, acting on the authority of the bishop, has the right of entry and inspection. The barred gate, a barrier to the common folk, must now be opened. The day of his arrival is one of tense, suppressed energy. The abbess issues a stark command. For the duration of the priest's visit, there is to be absolute silence. Not the holy silence of the rule, but a threatened, coerced silence. Any sister who makes a sound, she warns, will face a penance so severe she will wish she had never been born. The threat works. The nuns are terrified of the abbess, but they are also, in a strange way, terrified of the priest. He is a representative of the outside world, a world they have left behind. His presence is an intrusion, a judgment. When Father Michel arrives, the great gate is unbarred for the first time in weeks. The abbess meets him in the entryway, her face a mask of rigid composure. "Welcome, Father," she says, her voice tight. "As you can see, the rumors of disorder are baseless. We are at peace here, in quiet contemplation." As she speaks, a faint, choked squeak escapes from one of the nuns standing behind her. The abbess shoots the woman a look of pure venom, and the nun shrinks back as if struck. Father Michel pretends not to notice, but his eyes dart around, taking in the scene. He sees the fear in the nuns' faces, the unnatural rigidity of their postures. This is not the peaceful, serene community he remembers. This is a place under siege. He is led on a carefully curated tour. The scriptorium is silent. The chapel is empty. The refectory is spotless. It's all a little too perfect, too staged. It feels like walking through a tomb. The silence is not peaceful. It's the silence of a held breath. There's an interesting, often overlooked detail in church history regarding these kinds of visitations. They were called visitations, but they were essentially audits. The priest or bishop would inspect not just the spiritual health of the community, but the financial accounts, the state of the buildings, and the adherence to the rule. Some scholars argue these visits were less about saving souls and more about maintaining institutional control and protecting the church's assets and reputation. Father Michel is here to do damage control. The abbess thinks she has the situation contained, but she has underestimated the deep, insidious nature of the affliction. As they walk through the cloister garden, Father Michel stops to admire a rosebush. He turns to a nearby novice, Dio, and asks a simple question. "And what is your name, my child?" You open your mouth to answer. "My name is," but the word catches in your throat. All the tension, all the fear, all the suppressed chaos of the past few weeks seems to rise up in a single, unstoppable wave. You try to say your name, but what comes out is a strangled, ridiculous sound. No. It's a pathetic, half-hearted sound, but it is enough. It is the first crack in the carefully constructed dam of silence. You clap your hands over your mouth, your face burning with a shame so intense it feels like a physical heat. Father Michel stares at you. The abbess looks like she wants the ground to swallow her whole. And then, from an upper window overlooking the garden, comes an answering call. A full-throated, confident yawl from Sister Isabel, who has clearly had enough of the enforced quiet. Another nun joins in. Then another. The spell is broken. The carefully managed silence shatters into 1,000 pieces. Within a minute, the entire convent is ringing with the familiar, unholy chorus. Father Michel stands frozen in the middle of the garden, his jaw slapped, as the air fills with the sounds of 100 phantom cats. He has walked into the heart of the legend, and it is more real and more bizarre than he could have possibly imagined. He is a simple man, prepared for simple problems. He knows how to handle a dispute over a fence post. He has no idea what to do with this. He looks at the abbess, whose face has crumpled into a mask of defeat. He looks at the Meowing nuns, lost in their collective madness. He looks at you, the terrified novice whose single, broken word brought the whole charade crashing down. And he does the only thing a man so completely out of his depth can do. He slowly, deliberately, makes the sign of the cross, as if to ward off a legion of invisible demons. Father Michel retreats from the convent like a man fleeing a burning building. He is shaken to his core, his simple faith utterly unprepared for the reality of the devil's choir. He reports back to his superiors, his letter filled with frantic, confused descriptions of the chaos he witnessed. The matter is now officially beyond the scope of a local parish priest. While the bishop's office deliberates on a course of action, a new character arrives on the scene. A traveling Franciscan friar, Brother Thomas, is passing through the region on his way to a monastery in the north. He is an older man, weathered by the road, with sharp, intelligent eyes that have seen much of the world. Hearing the wild tales of the Meowing nuns in the local town, he is not horrified or titillated, but professionally curious. Hysteria, in his experience, comes in many flavors. He requests an audience with the abbess. She, now desperate for any solution, grants it. He does not come to judge or condemn, but to listen. He sits with her in her sparse office, the distant sounds of the ongoing feline chorus providing a surreal backdrop to their conversation. He asks calm, methodical questions. When did it start? Who was the first? What measures has she taken? As she recounts the story, her voice cracking with shame and frustration, Brother Thomas listens patiently. When she is finished, he nods slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. This is a grave and unusual affliction, Mother Abbess, he says, his voice calm. But it is not unheard of. It reminds me of a most peculiar case I encountered some years ago, in a well-regarded convent in the Germanic lands. And so, he tells a story that makes the Meowing in your convent seem almost tame by comparison. He speaks of a convent near the Rhine, a place as respected and disciplined as your own once was. One day, a nun, during a period of intense fasting, was overcome by a strange compulsion. She leaned over and bit the sister sitting next to her on the arm. The bitten sister, in a state of shock and panic, shrieked and then, inexplicably, turned and bit the nun next to her. Within an hour, he says, the entire convent was consumed by a biting frenzy. Nuns were chasing each other through the halls, nipping and biting at any exposed flesh. It was a scene of utter chaos. A holy house transformed into a kennel of snapping dogs. The local authorities were horrified. They tried prayers. They tried threats. Nothing worked. The compulsion was too strong. The biting, much like your Meowing, had become an unstoppable contagion. You are not present for this conversation. Of course. You are likely in the kitchen, trying to find some solace in this simple, repetitive act of scrubbing a pot. But the friar's story, which will later be recounted by the abbess to her small circle of remaining sane sisters, is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It widens the lens. You're strained, Localized madness is not unique. It is part of a larger, stranger pattern. The existence of these parallel cases is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for a psychological, rather than supernatural, explanation. The biting nuns of Germany, the Meowing nuns of France, and other, less documented cases of shrieking, trembling, or convulsing nuns across Europe point to a systemic issue. The convents, designed as places of serene refuge, were inadvertently creating the perfect conditions for these spectacular psychological breakdowns. The combination of isolation, repression, dietary deficiencies, and intense social pressure was a formula for mass hysteria. There is a fascinating, though debated, theory among some medical historians known as cultural bound syndromes. These are illnesses or afflictions that seem to exist only within a specific culture, their symptoms shaped by that culture's beliefs and anxieties. For example, some cultures have syndromes involving a fear that one's genitals are shrinking, a fear that makes no sense outside of that specific cultural context. It's argued that these convent hysterias were a kind of cultural bound syndrome of late medieval Europe. The nuns were not possessed by cats or possessed by dogs. They were possessed by a form of psychological distress that their culture could only interpret and express through these bizarre, symbolic, and often animalistic behaviors. Brother Thomas's story has a chilling conclusion. In the German case, after all spiritual solutions had failed, the exasperated civil authorities finally resorted to a brutal, secular threat. They warned the nuns that any sister who bit another would be flogged, and if that failed, they would be dunked in the icy waters of the Rhine. The biting, he says, stopped almost immediately. The abbess listened to this, her face a mixture of horror and dawning realization. The friar's story offers a terrible kind of hope. It suggests the affliction is not a demonic curse that is immune to earthly power, but it also suggests a cure that is brutal, humiliating, and utterly devoid of grace. The friar leaves the next morning, continuing on his journey north. But he leaves behind a powerful, dangerous idea. He has reframed the problem. Before, it was a spiritual war to be fought with prayer and penance. No, it has been presented as a behavioral problem to be managed, if necessary, with force. The seed of a new, more pragmatic, and far more ruthless strategy has been planted in the abbess's exhausted mind. She is not there yet. She still hopes for a divine solution. But the path toward a secular, and much harsher, intervention has been illuminated, and the memory of the biting nun serves as a dark and troubling precedent for the strange events still unfolding within your walls. The visit from the priest and the story from the friar act as a catalyst, not for a cure, but for a schism. The convent, already fractured by the bizarre behavior, now splits into ideological camps. The fragile unity of the sisterhood shatters completely, replaced by suspicion, fear, and whispered accusations. The battle for the soul of the convent begins in earnest. On one side are the demonists. This faction, led by a stern, older nun named Sister Agnes, wholeheartedly embraces the supernatural explanation. They are convinced the convent is under direct demonic assault. The Meowing is not a symptom of distress. It is the literal voice of the devil, speaking through the weaker willed sisters. Sister Agnes and her followers see themselves as the last bastion of true faith, only soldiers in a spiritual war. Their days become a frenzy of defensive piety. They constantly sprinkle holy water on doorways and windows. They spend their free time reciting litanies against evil. Their voices are low, urgent hum. They see omens in everything. A dead bird in the garden is a sign of Satan's triumph. A sudden gust of wind is the whisper of a demon. They look at the afflicted sisters not with pity, but with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. They see them as traitors, vessels who have willingly opened the gates to the enemy. On the other side of the afflictionists, this smaller, quieter group coalesces around the old, wise Sister Helene from the kitchen. They reject the idea of demonic possession. They do not believe their sisters are evil, merely sick. They see the Meowing as a divine trial, a mysterious illness sent by God to test their faith and compassion. Much like the story of Job, their response is one of pity and care. They are the ones who try to help. They will leave a bowl of fresh water for a sister who has been Meowing for hours, her throat surely parched. They will try to gently coax a napping nun out of the cold draught of a corridor and back to her cell. They pray not for the casting out of demons, but for healing and peace for their suffering sisters. They are viewed with deep suspicion by the demonists, who see their compassion as a dangerous naivety, a failure to recognize the true face of the enemy. And then there is the third, unspoken group, you and a few others who are simply confused. You don't know what you believe. The demonic explanation seems too dramatic, too much like a story from a book. But the idea of it being a simple illness doesn't quite capture the sheer, coordinated strangeness of it all. You are caught in the middle, a refugee in the no-man's land between two warring ideologies. This internal division is a common feature in historical accounts of crises. When faced with an inexplicable event, communities often fracture along pre-existing fault lines of belief. The debate within your convent mirrors a much larger, ongoing debate within the church at the time. The line between a true divine miracle or a demonic possession and a purely natural or medical phenomenon was a subject of intense and often heated argument among theologians and early physicians. There were official, though often confusing, guidelines for distinguishing a holy fool from a common madman, or a saintly vision from a demonic hallucination. The very question of what constituted a sickness versus a sign was a major intellectual battleground. The tension in the convent becomes unbearable. The silent meals in the refectory are now thick with animosity. The demonists sit at one end of the table, glaring at the afflictionists at the other. The Meowing sisters, lost in their own world, provide a chaotic soundtrack to the silent conflict. One day, the tension erupts. Sister Agnes, emboldened by her certainty, decides to take matters into her own hands. She corners Sister Isabel in the chapel, holding up a crucifix made of dark, knotted wood. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you, demon, to leave this vessel, she cries, her voice ringing with fanatical conviction. Sister Isabel, who had been quietly grooming her sleeve, looks up. She stares at the crucifix, then at Sister Agnes's furious face, and she does something no one expects. She lets out a low, guttural growl, like a cornered animal. Then, with a speed that is terrifying, she lunges forward and snatches the crucifix from Sister Agnes's hand. She holds it for a moment, then throws it across the chapel, where it clatters against the stone floor. Then she simply turns and walks away, leaving Sister Agnes standing there, trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine fear. The incident sends shockwaves through the community. For the demonists, it is absolute proof. A true child of God would never treat a holy object with such contempt. The demon has shown its face. For the afflictionists, it is a sign of how much their compassionate approach is needed. They argue that Sister Agnes's aggressive exorcism only served to frighten and agitate a sick and confused woman, provoking a defensive reaction. You, who witnessed the whole event from the shadows, are more lost than ever. You saw the wildness in Sister Isabella's eyes, but you also saw the terror. Was it a demon rejecting a holy symbol? Or was it a tormented human being, pushed beyond her breaking point, lashing out at her persecutor? You don't know. The line between sickness and sign, between madness and malice, has become hopelessly, terrifyingly blurred. The convent is no longer just a place of bizarre behavior. It is a place of open warfare. And you are trapped directly on the front lines. You are standing in the scriptorium, carefully grinding lapis lazuli to make blue pigment for an illuminated manuscript. The work is precise, methodical. It requires a steady hand and a clear mind. It used to be your favorite task, a small island of creative purpose in a sea of rote prayer. No, it's just a way to keep your hands busy, to stop them from shaking. Outside the thick walls of the scriptorium, The convent is a symphony of chaos. A chorus of me was echoes from the chapel, punctuated by the angry, righteous chanting of Sister Agnes' demon-hunting faction. The two psalms clash in the air, a perfect sonic representation of the convent's shattered soul. You dip your brush into the brilliant blue pigment. You are supposed to be painting the robe of the Virgin Mary, an image of serenity, of divine grace. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. How can you paint serenity when your world is collapsing into madness? How can you illustrate a holy book when you are beginning to suspect that the very holiness of this place is the poison that is killing you all? And that's when the thought, quiet and insidious, enters your mind. What if this isn't about demons or sickness? What if it's a protest? The idea is so radical, so heretical, it makes you pause. Your brush hovering over the vellum. A protest, not a conscious, organized rebellion with demands and manifestos, but something deeper, more primal, an involuntary protest to the soul itself. Consider your life. Every moment is prescribed. Every thought is policed. By the abyss and by your own conscience. Your identity was stripped from you at the gate, replaced by a rough wall habit and a new name. You are told your will is a source of sin. Your emotions are temptations. Your body is a vessel of corruption to be subdued through fasting and discomfort. You live in a state of perpetual, low-grade hunger, exhaustion, and sensory deprivation. You have no voice. Literally, silence is the highest virtue. What happens when you take a human being and systematically strip away everything that makes them an individual? What happens when you put them in a sealed container under immense pressure? Sometimes they break. But maybe you think, this isn't breaking. Maybe this is rushing out. Maybe when the conscious mind is so completely suppressed that it cannot even form a single word of complaint, the subconscious mind takes over, and it screams. It screams in the only language it is allowed. The language of nonsense. The language of the animals. A meow cannot be judged for its theological soundness. A yell cannot be passed for heresy. These sounds are pure, unmediated expressions of distress. They bypass the complex architecture of rules and sin that governs your life. It's a loophole, a psychological jailbreak. This perspective, viewing mass hysteria as a form of protest by the powerless, is a powerful lens used by many modern sociologists and historians. They call it the weapon of the weak. When you have no access to political power, no public voice, and no means of direct resistance, you resist in other ways, through foot-dragging, petty sabotage, gossip, and, in extreme cases, through epidemic illnesses and bizarre behaviors. It's a way of saying no when you are not allowed to speak the word. The nuns couldn't hold a protest sign, but they could, collectively and unconsciously, turn their bodies into instruments of chaos that completely derail the institution that oppressed them. You look at the page in front of you. The serene, blue-robed Madonna seems to mock you. What did she know of this? What did any of the saints in the stories know of this specific, grinding, soul-crushing boredom? Of the tyranny of the bell and the slow starvation of the senses. The stories are all about grand gestures of faith, of dramatic martyrdom myths. There are no stories about the heroism of surviving a Tuesday, or a Wednesday, or 1,000 identical days in a row. A lesser-known but fascinating detail of convent life was the spiritual journal. Some nuns, particularly those from aristocratic or learned backgrounds, were encouraged to keep a private journal of their spiritual progress, their temptations, and their mystical experiences. These were meant to be tools for self-examination, to be reviewed by the abbess or a confessor, but for some, they became the only sanctioned outlet for personal expression. Scholars who have studied these surviving journals have found not just pious reflections, but coded expressions of loneliness, frustration, doubt, and despair. It was a tiny crack in the wall of silence, but for most nuns, women like you, there was no such outlet. There was only the silence. And now, the silence has been filled with this new, strange noise. And you realize, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that you understand it. You are not one of them. You have not succumbed. But you get it. You feel the appeal, the sheer, unadulterated release of it. The idea of just letting go of the constant, exhausting effort of being a good, quiet, pious nun. The idea of just meowing, of letting that simple, animal sound drip through your throat and shatter the oppressive quiet. The blue pigment on your brush has started to dry. You dip it again, your hand more steady now. The thought, which at first seemed heretical, now feels like a revelation. It brings with it not a sense of peace, but a sense of profound, tragic understanding. You look around the scriptorium, at the other silent sisters, their faces etched with fear and confusion. You are all just girls who were put in a box. And now, the box is starting to break. This isn't the devil's work, it's human work. It is the sound of a spirit suffocating, and using its last ounce of strength to make a noise. Any noise at all, to prove that it is still there. The chaos within the convent walls has become a festering wound on the reputation of the local church. Father Michel's frantic report, combined with the escalating rumors and the friar's unsettling story, has finally worked its way up the ecclesiastical chain of command. The matter now lands on the desk of the regional bishop. The bishop, a man named Hugo, is not a humble parish priest or a wandering, philosophical friar. He is a nobleman, a politician in a robe. His position is one of power, wealth, and immense administrative responsibility. He is, for all intents and purposes, the CEO of God Inc. for this entire region, and he is not pleased. He reads the reports not with spiritual concern, but with a growing sense of irritation. Meowing nuns, biting nuns. This is not a spiritual crisis. It's an embarrassment. It makes the church look ridiculous, superstitious, and, worst of all, incompetent. It undermines his authority and threatens the smooth collection of tithes and donations that keep his lavish household running. His primary concern is not the salvation of the nuns' souls, but the integrity of the brand. He summons the abbess to his palatial residence in the city, a place of stained glass, polished marble, and whispered political dealings. It is a world away from the stone and silence of your convent. For the abbess, who has not left her post in 20 years, the journey itself is a trial. To be called before the bishop like a misbehaving schoolgirl is the ultimate humiliation. The meeting is, by all accounts, a disaster. The abbess, exhausted and broken, tries to explain the situation. She talks of her efforts, of the prayers and penances, of the demonic influence. Bishop Hugo listens with a barely concealed impatience. He is not interested in theological explanations. He is interested in results. This farce has gone on long enough, he declares, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. Your methods have clearly failed. This is a matter of discipline, not demons. You will return to your convent and restore order. Immediately. I do not care how. The implied threat is clear. If you cannot manage your own house, I will find someone who can. The bishop's attitude reflects a major tension within the medieval church. While many clerics were genuinely devout, the upper echelons of the institution were often deeply entangled with secular power and politics. A bishop was often a feudal lord with his own lands, knights, and political ambitions. A scandal like the Meowing nuns was a political problem. It could be used by rival nobles or the king to weaken the bishop's influence or to justify seizing church property. The very existence of this political layer is a detail often lost in romanticized portrayals of the era. The church was not just a spiritual body. It was a massive, and often ruthless, corporation. The abbess returns to the convent a changed woman. The last vestiges of her hope for a spiritual solution have been crushed under the bishop's pragmatic fury. She is no longer a spiritual leader trying to save her flock. She is a middle manager who has been given a final warning by her boss. Her fear of God has been replaced by a much more immediate and tangible fear of Bishop Hugo. and that fear will curdle into a new, harsher resolve. The atmosphere in the convent changes. The abbess's desperation becomes a palpable, oppressive force. The demon and affliction actions are both sidelined. The abbess is no longer interested in debating the cause of the problem. She is only interested in ending it. Her first act is to order all the Meowing sisters to be confined to the chapel. They are not to return to their cells, not even for sleep. They are to remain there, under constant watch, until they cease their noise. The chapel, once the heart of the convent's spiritual life, is officially transformed into a holding pen, an asylum. You and the other silent sisters are now tasked with being their jailers. You have to bring them their meager rations of bread and water. You have to watch over them in shifts through the long nights. It is a miserable, soul-destroying task. The scene inside the chapel is hellish. The space is crowded. The air sick and foul. The stone floor is cold and unforgiving. Some sisters are lost in their own worlds, curled up in corners, purring softly. Others are frantic, pacing back and forth like caged animals, letting out cries of frustration and despair. The sound is constant, a disorienting wall of noise that frays your nerves. One night, while you are on watch, you see Sister Helene, the old, compassionate nun, secretly slip a small piece of cheese to Sister Isabel, who has not eaten a proper meal in days. It is a tiny act of kindness in a world that has become brutal, but Sister Agnes, the leader of the demon faction, sees it. She strides over and snatches the cheese away. "Do not feed the demons," she hisses. "They must be starved out." The abbess, hearing the commotion, comes to investigate. You expect her to reprimand Sister Agnes for her zealotry. Instead, she turns on Sister Helene. "Your sentimentality is a weakness," the abbess says, her voice cold and dead. "It is prolonging this crisis. From now on, only bread and water, no exceptions." It's a turning point. The last vestiges of compassion are being systematically extinguished, replaced by a cold, desperate pragmatism. The bishop's frustration has trickled down and is now being visited upon the most vulnerable. The new strategy is not one of healing or exorcism. It's a siege. The abbess has declared war on the madness, and she is prepared to starve her own sisters into submission to win it. The bishop, despite his blustering, is a politician. He knows that brute force alone is not always the answer, especially when dealing with matters of the soul. Before resorting to more direct measures, he must be seen to have exhausted all spiritual avenues. It's a matter of protocol, of public relations. He needs to show the world that the church tried to solve the problem with its own tools before calling in the secular carpenters. And so, he decrees that a formal rite of exorcism will be performed, not on a single nun, but on the entire convent. This is not a small, private affair like Sister Agnes' amateur attempt. This is the real thing. The bishop dispatches a team, led by a stern, experienced priest named Father Gerard, who has a reputation as an expert in diabolical manifestations. He arrives with two junior priests and an air of grave importance. They carry with them the official tools of the trade, a heavy, leather-bound copy of the Roman ritual, vials of holy water, blessed salt, and a splinter of what is claimed to be a relic of a famous saint. The day of the exorcism is heavy with a strange, theatrical solemnity. The remaining silent sisters are tasked with preparing the chapel. You scrub the floors until the stones gleam, and you burn so much incense the air becomes thick and hazy, a deliberate attempt to create an atmosphere of sacred power. The Meowing sisters, who are still confined to the chapel, seem to sense the shift in energy. Some are more agitated than usual, pacing and hissing at the preparations. Others are eerily quiet, huddled together in a corner as if in anticipation of a storm. The ceremony begins. Father Gerard, dressed in his purple stolen surplice, stands before the altar. He is an imposing figure with a booming voice, and he clearly relishes the drama of the moment. He begins the rite, his Latin echoing through the chapel. "I exorcise you, most unclean spirit, you every satanic power, you every infernal adversary. He walks through the chapel, sprinkling holy water on the walls, the floor, and the assembled nuns. As the cold water flicks onto them, some of the afflicted sisters recoil, letting out sharp white howls. For a moment, it looks like it's working. The demonist faction, led by Sister Agnes, watches with vindicated excitement. This, they believe, is the final battle. But the reaction is short-lived. The sisters are not reacting to the holiness of the water. They are reacting to being suddenly splashed with cold liquid. Their cries are of surprise and annoyance, not demonic torment. After the initial shock, the Meowing resumes, now with a dampened, indignant tone. The exorcism rite is a fascinating piece of psychological theater. Its effectiveness, historically and even today, is a subject of intense debate. Believers see it as a powerful spiritual weapon. Skeptics and psychologists see it as a highly structured form of suggestion and placebo. If the possessed person believes in the power of the rite and the authority of the exorcist, it can have a profound psychological effect, essentially giving them permission to get better. But for it to work, the subject must be a willing, or at least a believing, participant in the drama. Here, in your convent, the drama falls flat. The afflicted nuns are too deep in their own world. They are not participants in Father Gerard's reality. They are living in their own, where the rules are different. His booming Latin is just another noise in a world of noises. These holy symbols have no power over a condition that was never about holiness to begin with. There's a little-known category of exorcism cases that church officials themselves were wary of: feigned possessions. Throughout history, there were documented instances of people faking demonic possession for attention, to escape punishment for a crime, or even just to get better food and lodging. Exorcists were trained to look for specific signs to weed out these fakers, things like speaking in unknown languages or having knowledge of distant events. The tragic irony in your chapel is that the nuns aren't faking, but their possession is so alien to the textbook definitions that it defies the exorcist's diagnostic tools. He is trying to fight a dragon, but the enemy is a fog. As the hours wear on, Father Gerard's confidence begins to fray. He has used all the prayers, invoked all the saints, and presented all the relics, and still, the choir of Meals continues, a surreal and mocking counterpoint to his sacred liturgy. His booming commands are met with insolent white owls. His spiritual authority is dissolving in a sea of absurdity. The ceremony reaches its farcical climax when he attempts a direct confrontation. He stands before Sister Isabel, the leader of the affliction, and holds the relic directly in front of her face. In the name of Saint Vitalis, he commands, "I order you to speak your name, demon." Sister Isabel looks at the relic, a small, dark piece of wood in a silver case. She tilts her head, then she leans forward and, with a delicate, cat-like motion, licks it. A collective gasp goes through the room. Father Gerard snatches the relic back as if it were on fire. It is the ultimate act of profane indifference. The demon is not even bothering to recoil in horror. It is treating the sacred object like a salty treat. The exorcism has failed. Utterly, spectacularly. Father Gerard, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, brings the ceremony to an abrupt end. He and his priests pack up their holy arsenal and leave with barely a word to the abbess. They came to cast out a demon, but all they found was a baffling, unshakable madness. The failure of the exorcism is a devastating blow. It was the church's ultimate weapon, and it proved to be a toy sword. For the abbess, it is the final, crushing proof that this is a problem no prayer can solve. For the silent sisters, it extinguishes the last ember of hope for a miraculous recovery. The door to a divine solution has been slammed shut and locked. And now, brother, more worldly doors are beginning to open. The news of the failed exorcism spreads through the village like a pestilence. If the church's most powerful ritual had no effect, then the evil infesting the convent must be of a terrifying and resilient kind. Fear. which had been simmering for weeks, now boils over into panic, and panic needs a target. The villagers, in their simple, superstitious worldview, look for a tangible source for the demonic influence. The nuns are meowing like cats. The logic, to them, is inescapable. The cats must be to blame. They are not just animals. They are the vessels of the demons, the physical conduits through which the devil has entered the holy house. They knew, dark chapter of the hysteria begins, not inside the convent walls, but in the muddy lanes and thatched cottages of the surrounding village. A wave of persecution against the local cat population begins. It starts with suspicion. A farmer's wife sees a black cat cross her path and blames it for the milk turning sour. A child develops a fever, and the parents recall seeing a stray cat sleeping near their window. These are no longer coincidences. They are evidence. The cats are agents of malice, spies for Satan. Their purrs the whispers of demons. Their nighttime meows the sound of dark rituals. This fear quickly escalates into violence. Groups of young men, fueled by fear and cheap ale, form vigilante gangs. They roam the village at night, armed with clubs and sacks. Any cat they find, a beloved house pet, a feral stray, it doesn't matter, is captured. The animals are treated as witches' familiars, subjected to trials and brutal executions. They are drowned in the river, burned in bonfires, or simply beaten to death in the street. The irony is tragic and profound. The villagers, in an attempt to combat a phantom, supernatural evil, are committing a very real and brutal one. The mass psychogenic illness of the nuns has now triggered a second wave of mass hysteria in the town, Unholy village. From inside the convent, you are shielded from the worst of this, but you are not entirely ignorant. The lay brothers who bring your supplies tell hushed, horrified stories of what is happening. One morning, from your high, narrow cell window, you see a plume of dark smoke rising from the direction of the village square and hear the faint, cruel sound of cheering. You don't know for sure what is burning, but a cold dread settles in your stomach. The persecution of cats has a long and dark history in Europe, and what is happening in your village is not an isolated incident. While cats were valued in some contexts, they were also deeply associated with paganism and witchcraft. The medieval church's stance on them was often ambiguous and contradictory. Some saints were patrons of cats, but some papal decrees condemned them, particularly black cats, as diabolical creatures. This historical ambivalence made them easy scapegoats when times were hard or a community was gripped by fear, be it plague, famine, or a convent gone mad. The local cat population often paid the price. It's a classic example of scapegoating. A community transfers its anxiety and aggression onto a powerless and convenient target. The most bizarre part of this whole affair is the debate it's sparked among the sane inside the convent. Sister Agnes and her demonized faction see the villagers' actions as a righteous, if cruel, crusade. They believe the townspeople are wisely attacking the devil's army at its source. They whisper approvingly of the nightly purges. Sister Helena and the afflictionists are horrified. They see it as a senseless, cruel slaughter of God's innocent creatures, a sinful overreaction born of ignorance and fear. The two factions are now not just arguing about the nature of the nun's illness, but about the morality of the village's response. One day, a young lay brother, his face streaked with tears, confides in Sister Helene as he delivers a sack of oats. He tells her his own family's cat, a gentle ginger tomcat he'd had since he was a boy, was taken and killed the night before. He is racked with guilt and grief. Is this God's rule, sister? He asks, his voice trembling. Does God want us to kill our pets? Sister Helene can only offer him words of comfort, but the incident highlights the real-world consequences of the convent's internal crisis. The madness is no longer contained. It has spilled over the walls and is now causing real harm, real suffering, in the outside community. The abbess, hearing of the escalating violence, is caught in a terrible bind. She knows the cats are not to blame, but to publicly defend them would be to admit the problem lies within her own nuns, a confession she is not yet willing to make. Her silence becomes a tacit endorsement of the slaughter. The Great Cat Purge has an unforeseen and ironic consequence. With their natural predators decimated, the population of rats and mice in the village and its surrounding granaries begins to explode. The villagers, in their attempt to solve a spiritual problem, are in the process of creating a very real, and potentially far more dangerous, ecological and health crisis for themselves. But no one is thinking that far ahead. They are trapped in the present, in a spiral of fear and violence, all of it radiating outwards from the strange, sad, and unholy choir that continues its ceaseless performance behind the convent stone walls. The failure of the exorcism and the escalating chaos in the village finally forced the bishop's hand. If the tools of theology have failed, perhaps the tools of science, or what passed for science in this era, might offer a solution. It is a move born not of intellectual curiosity, but of pure desperation. He sends for a physician. This is not a village barber surgeon who deals in bloodletting and tooth-pulling. This is Maestro Arnaud, a man of considerable reputation from the university city of Montpellier, which was famous for its medical school. He is a man of books, not prayers. He thinks in terms of humors and miasmas, not demons and sins. His arrival at the convent represents a radical shift in perspective, a clash of two entirely different worldviews. Maestro Arnaud is a stark contrast to the priests and friars who have come before. He is dressed in the dark, sober robes of a scholar, not a cleric. He is small, bird-like, with sharp, inquisitive eyes that seem to miss nothing. He does not carry a crucifix. He carries a leather satchel filled with charts, strange metal instruments, and small vials of pungent liquids. He smells of dried herbs and vellum, not incense. The abbess greets him with a wary, grudging respect. She sees him as unnecessary evil, a secular tool to solve a problem that has overwhelmed her spiritual authority. She grants him permission to examine the afflicted sisters, a decision that horrifies Sister Agnes and her demoniac faction, who see it as inviting a godless man to meddle in a holy war. Maestro Arnaud's methods are entirely different from the exorcist. He does not command. He observes. He spends hours in the chapel, which has become the de facto ward for the sick. He sits quietly on a stool in the corner, making notes on a wax tablet. He watches the nuns' behaviors, listens to the specific tones of their miwas, and observes their interactions. He is not looking for signs of evil. He is looking for patterns, for symptoms. He then begins his examinations. He takes each of the afflicted nuns, one by one, into a small, private room. You are tasked with assisting him, bringing water and clean linens. It's a fascinating and slightly terrifying experience. You get to see the physician's mind at work. He is methodical. He checks their pulse. He looks at the color of their tongue. He holds a polished silver dish up to their mouth to examine the vapor of their breath. He asks them questions, not about their soul, but about their body. Do you have headaches? Is your sleep troubled? Is there a ringing in your ears? Most of the nuns don't answer in words, replying only with mews or hisses. It doesn't seem to faze him. He simply makes a note. His entire practice is based on the ancient theory of the four humors, a medical model that dominated Western medicine for over 300 years. The theory held that the human body was filled with four basic substances, or humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. A healthy person had these humors in perfect balance. All diseases, physical and mental, were the result of an imbalance. A person with too much black bile, for example, would be melancholic. Someone with too much blood would be sanguine. After examining a dozen sisters, Maestro Arnaud comes to a diagnosis. He summons the abbess. Mother Abbess, he announces with confidence. The women are suffering from an excess of black bile. It has engendered a profound melancholy in their spirits. which has been exacerbated by the convent's cold and damp environment. This melancholy has curdled their animal spirits and is causing them to emit these strange, beastly sounds. It sounds like nonsense to a modern ear, but in his time, it was cutting-edge medical science. The concept of animal spirits, not souls, but a fine, vaporous substance that was thought to flow through the nerves and control sensation and movement, was a key part of this medical framework. A curdling of these spirits was a perfectly logical explanation for irrational behavior. Historians of science still debate how much these ancient physicians truly believed in the literal existence of these humors, versus using them as a metaphorical framework to understand disease. His prescribed cure is based entirely on this diagnosis. It is a multi-pronged attack designed to rebalance the body's humors. First, a change in diet. The bread and water are to be replaced with warming, moistening foods, chicken soup, cooked vegetables, and a little watered-down wine to gladden the heart and purify the blood. Second, he prescribes a foul-smelling herbal potion, a mixture of valerian and other sedatives, to be taken 3 times a day to soothe the agitated spirits. Finally, and most importantly, he recommends that the nuns be removed from the cold, dark chapel and exposed to sunlight and fresh air for at least hours a day. The Amos, desperate for any plausible course of action, agrees to everything. The new regimen begins, for the first time in months. A glimmer of a rational, humane approach to the crisis appears. The affliction ISD faction, led by Sister Helene, is overjoyed. The physician's recommendations, better food, calming herbs, fresh air, are a scientific validation of their own compassionate instincts. For a few days, it seems to be working. The improved diet and sedative herbs have a noticeable effect. The nuns are calmer. The intensity of the Meowing subsides. Some sisters even begin to speak a few words. There is a fragile sense of hope in the air. Perhaps science, not God, holds the key. But the illness is too deeply rooted. It is not a simple matter of unbalanced humors. It is a complex psychological phenomenon, born of trauma and depression. After a week, the novelty of the treatment wears off, and the old behaviors begin to creep back in. The effect of the physician's cure was only temporary, a brief respite, not a solution. Maestro Anu, his methods having failed, packs his satchels. He has offered a diagnosis and a treatment based on the best medical knowledge of his time. And it was not enough. The convent's strange fever, it seems, is resistant to both prayer and potions. The authorities are running out of options. The failure of Maestro Anu's humoral medicine is the last straw. The bishop has tried prayer, he has tried science. Both have failed. The scandal is now threatening to spiral beyond his control, with whispers at the devil's convent reaching as far as the royal court. His patience is at an end. His reputation is on the line. He decides that if the nuns will not be cured, they will be coerced. He summons not a priest or a doctor, but the local magistrate, a secular authority, a man of law and order named Renaud. Renaud is a grim, pragmatic man whose job is to enforce the king's peace, collect taxes, and dispense justice. He is not concerned with souls or humors. He is concerned with public order. And this convent has become a source of profound public disorder. The bishop gives the magistrate a simple, brutal mandate. End this, by any means necessary. It's a significant moment. The church is officially admitting its own powerlessness and handing the problem over to the secular arm. It's a quiet, but crucial, concession that some problems cannot be solved from the pulpit. Renaud arrives at the convent not with a cross or a medical bag, but with a small retinue of armed guards. His presence immediately changes the atmosphere. The authority he carries is not spiritual or intellectual. It is the raw, physical authority of the state, backed by sword and steel. He does not ask for a tour. He does not wish to examine anyone. He demands that all the nuns, afflicted and sane alike, be assembled in the cloister garden. The abbess, her own authority now completely superseded, has no choice but to comply. It's a grey, overcast day, which matches the mood perfectly. You stand in a line with the other silent sisters, your heart pounding. The Meowing nuns are herded into the garden by the guards. They seem confused by this break in their routine. Their chorus of sounds more muted and anxious than usual. The magistrate, we know, stands on the steps of the chapel, flanked by 2 guards. He lets the silence stretch out, his cold eyes sweeping over the assembled women. He is a master of intimidation, and he uses the silence as a weapon. Finally, he speaks. His voice is not loud, but it cuts through the air like a razor. I am Renaud, magistrate of this domain. In the name of the king, I have been made aware of a disturbance in this house. A disturbance that has disrupted the public peace and brought shame upon this community. This disturbance ends today. He pauses, letting the words sink in. I am not here to debate theology or to diagnose illness. I am here to restore order. Therefore, I am issuing a formal proclamation. From this moment forward, any woman in this convent who makes the sound of a cat, or who behaves in a beastly manner, will be taken by my men to the village square and publicly flogged. A collective gasp runs through the assembled nuns. Flogging was a common punishment, but it was a brutal, humiliating public spectacle, usually reserved to thieves and other criminals. The idea of it being applied to nuns, 2 brides of Christ, is shocking, almost unthinkable. Let me be clear, Renaud continues, his voice devoid of any emotion. This is not a threat. It is a promise. I have no interest in why you are doing this. I only care that you stop. The choice is yours. Piety and silence, or the writ. You have 1 hour to contemplate your decision. With that, he turns and walks away, leaving his guards positioned at the exits of the garden. He has just presented the nuns with a stark and terrible choice. On one side is the strange, compulsive, inner world of their hysteria. On the other is the certainty of immediate, real, and painful physical violence. The ultimatum is a brutal but brilliant piece of psychology. It works by changing the calculus of consequences. The reward for Meowing was a release of psychological tension, a retreat from the pressures of piety. The punishment was extra prayers or a disapproving look from the abbess, abstract and often ineffective. Renaud has now placed a new, terrifyingly concrete item on the punishment side of the scale. He has weaponized their sanity. Historians who have studied these events often point to this moment, the introduction of a credible, secular threat, as the turning point. It's a controversial and uncomfortable fact. It's just that, at some level, the hysterical behavior was not entirely involuntary. If it were a truly uncontrollable neurological condition, no threat could stop it. The fact that such threats often did work suggests that the condition existed in a grey area, a space where the subconscious mind was making a choice, albeit a strange one. The threat of the whip forced that subconscious choice into the conscious mind. It made the nuns weigh the comfort of their delusion against the pain of reality. The magistrate's ultimatum hangs in the cold air of the garden. The Meowing sisters, for the first time in weeks, fall completely silent. They look at each other, their eyes wide with a dawning awareness. The dream is being violently interrupted by the waking world. The abstract fears of hell and damnation are suddenly replaced by the very concrete and understandable fear of a leather whip on their backs. The game has changed. The madness has just been presented with an invoice, and the price is very, very high. The hour that follows the magistrate's ultimatum is the longest in the convent's history. The garden, which for weeks has been a theater of chaos, becomes a space of tense, unnatural stillness. The magistrate's guards stand like statues at the exits, their presence a constant, silent reminder of the promise that has been made. They are not here to hurt anyone. They are simply the physical embodiment of a consequence. You stand with the other silent sisters, a knot of fear and anticipation in your stomach. You don't know what to expect. Will the madness prove stronger than the threat, or you actually have to witness one of your sisters being dragged away to be whipped. The thought is sickening. But you are watching the wrong people. The true drama is unfolding among the afflicted. They huddle together in small groups, their usual feline confidence completely gone. They are no longer lost in their private, dissociative world. They have been violently yanked back into reality. Their eyes are no longer unfocused and distant. They are sharp with a new, raw fear. For the first time in a long time, they are looking at each other not as fellow cats, but as fellow women, trapped, terrified. You see them whispering to each other, their voices urgent and human. The spell, it seems, is beginning to break. The arrival of the soldiers is the final, decisive stroke. They are not the magistrate's personal guards, but a small detachment of regular soldiers, dispatched from the regional garrison at the bishop's request. They march into the convent grounds with a discipline and professionalism that is utterly alien to this place. They are clad in leather jerkins, with steel helmets and swords at their belts. They are loud, solid, and unmistakably real. They do not enter the garden. They simply form a line just outside the main gate, their spears held at rest. Their purpose is purely symbolic. They are a visual guarantee. The magistrate's threat was not a bluff. The sole, coercive power of the state is here, present and waiting. The psychological impact of their arrival is immense. Soldiers represent a different kind of power from anything the nuns have ever known. The abbess's power is spiritual. The bishop's is political. The physician's is intellectual. But the soldier's power is stark, physical, and final. It is the power to inflict pain and to take life. Their presence shatters the last remnants of the convent's insular reality. The fantasy world of the devil's choir cannot coexist with the brutal reality of a line of armed men. There's a concept in conflict resolution and psychology called the credible threat. A threat is only effective if the person being threatened believes it will be carried out. The magistrate's words were powerful, but the sight of the soldiers makes that threat undeniable. It removes all ambiguity, all room for doubt. It's a phenomenon seen in other historical contexts too. During the dancing plagues, authorities sometimes hired musicians, believing the dancers needed to dance the fever out. This only encouraged the mania. But when they switched tactics and threatened imprisonment or physical punishment, the dancing often stopped. The introduction of a real world negative consequence that outweighed the psychological benefit of the hysterical behavior was often the key to breaking the spell. Some scholars find this explanation uncomfortable, as it seems to blame the victims, suggesting they had more control than they let on. The truth is likely more complex. The threat didn't just give them a reason to stop. It may have provided the powerful psychological shock needed to jolt them out of the dissociative state itself. You watch Sister Isabel, the one who started it all. She is standing alone, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling. She is not meowing, she is not hissing. She is watching the soldiers through the arches of the cloister, her face a mask of dawning horror. The cat is gone. In its place is a terrified young woman who has just understood the terrible gravity of her situation. The abbess walks through the garden, her face pale but resolute. She no longer looks defeated. The arrival of secular power has, paradoxically, restored a measure of her own. She is no longer fighting a fog of madness. She is enforcing an edict. She approaches a small group of formerly Meowing nuns. The hour is almost up. She says, her voice low and steady, "You will go to the chapel. You will kneel, and you will pray." In silence, one of the nuns, a woman who just yesterday was pretending to catch mice, looks up at the abbess. Her eyes are filled with tears. She nods. "Yes, Mother Abbess," she whispers. It is the first time she has spoken a human word in weeks. When I run, the afflicted sisters begin to move toward the chapel. Their steps are slow, shaky, like people learning to walk again. They move not as a pack of animals, but as a procession of shamed and frightened women. The madness is receding. The great, strange fever is finally breaking. Not with a prayer or a potion, but under the cold, silent gaze of a line of soldiers. The hour passes. The magistrate, Renaud, returns to the garden. His face is grim and unreadable as before. He stands on the chapel steps and surveys the scene. The garden is empty, save for you and the other silent sisters, who stand huddled together like sheep in a storm. The afflicted are all inside the chapel as ordered, and from within the chapel, there is no sound, no miwas, no wails, no hisses. There is only silence. Very deep, profound, and absolute silence. Renaud gives a curt nod of satisfaction. He turns to the abbess. It seems order has been restored. Mother Abbess, see that it remains so. He gestures to his guards, and then to the soldiers at the gate. With a clatter of steel and leather, the armed presence withdraws from the convent. They have done their job without drawing a single sword. Their presence alone was the cure. And then, a new kind of silence descends upon the convent. It is not the peaceful, contemplative silence of the rule of Saint Benedict. It is not the tense, watchful silence you experienced in the early days of the outbreak. It is a heavy, awkward, shame-filled silence. It is the silence of the morning after a terrible argument. A silence thick with unspoken words, with regret, and with the memory of things that cannot be unsaid. Or in this case, a meow. The cure has been as shocking and traumatic as the disease itself. The threat of violence has worked. The meowing has stopped. Completely and abruptly. It's as if a switch has been thrown. The women who, just that morning, were seemingly lost in an involuntary animalistic psychosis are now sitting quietly in the chapel pews, their heads bowed, their hands folded in their laps. This sudden cessation of symptoms is one of the most baffling and telling features of mass psychogenic illnesses. An entire group can be in the grips of a powerful collective delusion one moment, and then, when the underlying social or psychological conditions change, the symptoms can vanish almost overnight. It's not a gradual recovery, like healing from a physical wound. It's a sudden, jarring return to reality. You are tasked with bringing the evening meal to the sisters in the chapel. You walk into the hallowed space, your footsteps echoing unnaturally in the quiet. The women are all there. They look pale, exhausted, and deeply ashamed. They avoid your gaze. They take the bread and water you offer with trembling hands, whispering thank you in voices hoarse from disuse, or perhaps from too much use of a different kind. The social dynamics of the convent have been irrevocably altered. The lines that were drawn between demon ISD and affliction ISD, between sane and insane, have now dissolved, leaving behind a confusing swamp of shared trauma. How do you look at Sister Isabel now? Is she the demon-possessed wretch Sister Agnes claimed her to be? Is she the poor, sick soul Sister Helene pitied? Or is she just a young woman who participated in a strange, collective cry for help that went too far? There's a little-known phenomenon in social psychology called post-hysteria shame, after an episode of mass hysteria subsides. The participants are often left with a profound sense of embarrassment and confusion. They struggle to reconcile their normal identity with the memory of their bizarre behavior. Many try to deny it ever happened, to collectively forget the episode. This period of communal amnesia is a coping mechanism, a way for the group to repair its social fabric without having to directly confront rupture. The abbess, seizing the opportunity, encourages this forgetting. The very next day, the normal, rigorous schedule of the convent is reinstated with a vengeance. The bells ring for matins. Nuns, and prime, work duties are assigned. The rule of silence is strictly enforced. The goal is to paper over the crack, to pretend the last few months never happened. It is a forced march back to normalcy. But you can't just erase a memory. The silence in the refectory is now almost unbearable. You're sure? It was filled with miwas. No, it is filled with the deafening sound of everyone trying not to think about the miwas. You catch Sister Clement's eye across the table. She, who once burdened rubbed against the table legs, now stares intently at her soup, her face flushed with a deep, burning shame. You see the evidence of the madness everywhere. A scratch mark on a wooden pew. A lingering, foul smell in a corner of the chapel. The way certain sisters now flinch at any sudden noise. The way no one can look at a cat. The convent's official mousers, who have survived the village purge. In quite the same way again. The fever has broken. The madness is over. But the convent is not healed. It is scarred. The sudden, shocking silence that has replaced the chaos is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of trauma. It is the silence of a wound that has been crudely stitched up without being cleaned, leaving the infection to fester deep beneath the surface. The choir has been silenced, but the memory of its strange, sad music will echo in these stone walls for a long, long time. The silence that follows is a thick, heavy blanket smothering the convent. The days resume their old rhythm, a relentless metronome of bells and prayers. But the soul of the routine is gone. It's a performance of piety, a pantomime of normalcy. Everyone is playing their part, but no one is forgetting the time when the play was interrupted by a wild, unscripted chorus. You watch the other sisters, trying to gauge the temperature of this new, fragile piece. The women who were once the most fervent meowers are now the most ostentatiously devout. They pray the loudest. They work the hardest. They keep their eyes fixed to the floor with a fierce, desperate concentration. It is an act of overcompensation, a frantic attempt to outrun the memory of their own bizarre behavior. Their piety is not born of love for God, but of a deepened, abiding shame. The abbess rules with a new, brutal severity. She, too, is a victim of the shame. Her authority was broken. Her spiritual leadership failed. She had to be rescued by secular, armed men. It is a humiliation she will never forget. Her response is to double down on discipline, to enforce the rule of Saint Benedict not as a path to grace, but as a cage to contain any future chaos. There are new punishments for minor infractions. A sideways glance, a whispered word, a moment of idleness. All are met with sharp rebukes and dexter penances. The convent, which had briefly become an asylum, is now slowly turning into a labor camp of the soul. This period of reaction is a common, if tragic, epilogue to such events. Institutions, when faced with a major disruption, often react by tightening control, increasing surveillance, and punishing dissent, real or imagined. They mistake the symptoms, the Meowing, for the disease, which was the oppressive environment itself. By making the environment even more oppressive, they are simply planting the seeds for a future crisis. Historians still debate whether these episodes of demonic possession and mass hysteria increased or decreased after the Reformation, with some arguing the new Protestant emphasis on personal responsibility made such collective outbursts less common, while others claim they simply took on different forms. You find your own place in this new order. You are one of the silent ones, one of the ones who did not break. They should give you a certain status, but it doesn't. In a strange way, you feel a kind of survivor's guilt. You didn't succumb to the madness, but you understood it. You felt its pull. Now, you watch your sisters struggling with their shame, and you feel a profound, lonely pity. The schism between the demonists and the afflictionists has vanished, but the memory of it lingers. Sister Agnes, who was so certain of demonic possession, is now quietly triumphant. She sees the current, rigid discipline as a vindication of her stance. She gives knowing, "I told you so" looks to Sister Helene, the compassionate one. Sister Helene, for her part, seems to have with it. The new, harsh regime has broken her gentle spirit. She still does her work in the kitchen, but she rarely speaks, even when permitted. The sadness you once saw in her eyes has now settled into a permanent state of weary resignation. The compassionate response has been defeated. The hardliners have won. One of the most peculiar and little discussed after effects of mass psychogenic illness is the fate of patient zero. Sister Isabel, the girl whose first meow started it all, is now the most isolated person in the convent. She's a pariah. The other sisters, in their own shame, projects their guilt onto her. She is the scapegoat, the one who led them all astray. They shun her. They will not sit next to her in the refectory. They fall silent if she enters a room. You watch her one afternoon in the garden. She is kneeling, reading a patch of herbs, her movements stiff and awkward. She works with a frantic energy, as if trying to scrub her own memory from the earth. She is thinner than ever, a ghost haunting the scene of her own strange crime. The abbess has assigned her the most menial, grueling tasks. It is a quiet, sustained punishment that will likely last for the rest of her life. You think back to that moment when you saw a flicker of the real, terrified girl in her eyes. That girl is now trapped forever behind a wall of shame and ostracism. You wonder what will become of her. Will she live out her days as the convent silent, walking sin, or will the pressure, once again, become too much? Will she find a new, even stranger way for her soul to scream? The silence of the convent is the silence of a held breath. It is the quiet of a community that has survived a storm but has lost its moorings. The problem has been suppressed, not solved. The choir has been silenced by fear, but the reasons they started singing have never been addressed. The walls of the convent are as thick as ever. The rules are strict. The silence is profound. You can't help but feel that you are all just waiting for the next crack to appear in the great, holy facade. Years pass. The seasons turn, reeling slowly outside the convent walls. But inside, time has a different texture. It is measured in the wearing down of stone steps, the shading of ink on vellum, the slow deepening of lines on the faces around you. The dramatic, bizarre episode of the Devil's Choir is never spoken of. It has become a secret, a collective nightmare that everyone has tacitly agreed to forget. But a memory so powerful cannot be erased. They can only be buried, and buried things have a way of working their way back to the surface. You are no longer a novice. You are a seasoned member of the community, your hands calloused from work, your mind accustomed to the rhythms of the bell. You have survived. You have learned to live within the rigid confines of this life, finding small moments of peace in the scent of baking bread or the quiet satisfaction of a well-tended herb garden. The convent itself has changed. The abbess, old and embittered by the scandal that forever tarnished her tenure, has passed away. They knew. Younger abbess now rules, a woman who was a mere novice when the Meowing occurred. She knows the stories, of course, but for her, it is history, not a lived trauma. Under her rule, some of the harshest restrictions have been relaxed. A quiet laugh is no longer a punishable offense. The atmosphere is less like a prison, though it is still far from free. One cool autumn afternoon, you are sitting by the well in the cloister garden, mending a torn altar cloth. The well is where you once saw Sister Isabel, at the height of her madness, staring at her own reflection. The memory is still vivid. You look down into the dark water, and for a moment, you see not your own face, but the face of the young woman you were when you first arrived, terrified and alone. What did it all mean? That is the question that has echoed in the silent corners of your mind for years. You have had a lifetime to contemplate the strange fever that gripped this place. Was it the devil? Was it a sickness? Was it a protest? You've come to believe it was all three, and none of them. The devil, if he existed, was in the despair born of hopelessness. The sickness was not of the body, but of the environment, and the protest was one the protesters themselves did not even know they were making. You think of the other women, Sister Agnes, the fierce demon ISD, died firm in her belief that she had fought a great spiritual battle. Sister Helene, the compassionate one, passed away peacefully in her sleep, her quiet kindness remembered only by a few. The magistrate, Renaud, was eventually promoted, his decisive handling of the convent crisis a footnote in a successful career. And what of Sister Isabel? She is still here. She is a stooped, silent, middle-aged woman who spends her days in the laundry, her hands perpetually rough from lion hot water. She has not spoken more than a handful of words into decades, She is a ghost, a living monument to the convent's great, unspoken shame. Sometimes you catch her eye, and you see nothing there, a profound, hollowed-out emptiness. Whatever fire was in her, whatever scream was trying to get out, it was either extinguished or it has retreated so deep inside her that no one will ever find it again. This retrospective view is a luxury that historical figures rarely get. They live their lives forward, making decisions based on the limited knowledge and beliefs of their time. It is we, looking back, who can see the larger patterns. The debate among historians about the ultimate cause of these phenomena continues. Was it ergot poisoning? A fungus that grows on rye bread and can cause hallucinations, unlikely to be so widespread and specific in its symptoms. Was it nutritional deficiencies? Almost certainly a contributing factor, creating a baseline of psychological, neurological vulnerability. Was it purely social and psychological? This remains the most compelling explanation. The convent was a machine perfectly designed to produce these results. A young novice, no older than you were when you arrived, comes and sits beside you. She is new to this life, her face still open and unmarked by the years. She sees you staring into the well. What are you looking at, sister? She asks, her voice bright with a curiosity that has not yet been disciplined out of her. You look at her, and you see the cycle beginning anew. You want to warn her. You want to tell her about the weight of the silence, about the tyranny of the bell, about the strange things a mind can do when it is locked in a cage, even a holy one. You want to tell her the story of the time the music in this place went sour. But you don't. The story is forbidden. It is a locked room in the history of this house. To speak of it would be to unlock it. And you are not sure what would happen if you did. So you simply pull your needle through the linen cloth and offer her a small, sad smile. Just my own reflection, child, you say. Just my own reflection. You look back into the dark water of the well. The face that looks back at you is older now, lined with the years. But the eyes are the same. They are the eyes of someone who has seen something extraordinary and has lived to tell the tale, even if only to herself. You survived the unholy plague. You listened to the devil's choir and did not join in, and in the great, heavy silence that remains, you are left with the quiet, unsettling knowledge of what a human soul is capable of when it is pushed to the very edge of its endurance. And so, we leave you there, a quiet figure by a will, a keeper of a silent, sacred history. But what of the story itself? What became of this strange, animalistic malady that flared up in the dark corners of medieval Europe? The phenomenon of the Meowing nuns of France and the biting nuns of Germany did not simply vanish. These were not the lost gasps of mass hysteria. Rather, they were early, dramatic examples of a recurring pattern in human history. The specific symptoms changed with the times, shaped by the anxieties and beliefs of the culture, but the underlying mechanism remained eerily consistent. In the centuries that followed, the possessions became more theatrical. The rise of witchcraft trials provided a new, terrifying script. Afflicted girls in places like Salem, Massachusetts, would not meow, but would convulse, contort their bodies into impossible shapes, and claimed to see spectral visions of their neighbors tormenting them. The core ingredients were the same: a closed, repressive community, a group of powerless young women, and an underlying atmosphere of extreme social and religious anxiety. The sickness simply adapted, putting on the costume of the era's greatest fears. As the world moved into the industrial age, the language of the affliction changed again. Demons and witches gave way to the more scientific vocabulary of neurology and psychology. In the late 19th century, factory floors, another type of high-stress, low-agency environment, became new hotspots for mass hysteria. Young female workers would suddenly be struck by fainting spells, uncontrollable trembling, or temporary blindness that would spread rapidly among their colleagues. Doctors at the time, like your maestro I knew, diagnosed it with the language they had, calling it neurasthenia or female hysteria. The 20th century saw the phenomenon continue, adapting to new fears. During the Cold War, a mysterious phantom anesthetist was reported in several cities, a figure who would prowl neighborhoods at night, spraying a sweet-smelling gas that caused weakness and nausea. Despite widespread panic and numerous victims, no physical evidence of such an attacker was ever found. It was a mass anxiety attack, given form by the era's fear of chemical warfare and unseen enemies. And today, in our modern, hyper-connected world, mass psychogenic illness is still very much with us. It just travels on new vectors. It spreads not through whispers in a cloister, but through social media feeds and instant messaging. Think of the sudden, unexplained outbreaks of tics and Tourette's-like symptoms reported among teenagers in recent years. A phenomenon some researchers have linked to social media platforms where such symptoms are showcased in, on a subconscious level, mimic. The contagion is no longer confined to a single convent or village. It can be global. This is the great, and perhaps unsettling, legacy of your story. The tale of the Meowing nuns is not just a quirky, bizarre footnote from the Dark Ages. It's a foundational story about the human mind and its complex relationship with society. It holds a mirror up to us, reminding us that we are not as rational as we like to think. We are all, to some extent, creatures of our environment, deeply susceptible to the beliefs and anxieties of the group. The academic world still picks at the bones of these stories, and the debate, in a way, continues. Was it a form of protest? By a coping mechanism? A neurological event triggered by stress and malnutrition? A culturally bound syndrome? The most honest answer is likely, yes. It was all of these things. A complex cocktail of social, psychological, and biological factors. There is no single, simple explanation, because the human soul is not a simple thing. The story of your convent serves as a timeless, cautionary tale. It shows how easily reason can be overwhelmed by fear, and how communities under pressure can turn on their most vulnerable members, whether they be possessed nuns or the village cats. It reminds us that when we try to enforce an impossible standard of conformity, when we deny people a voice and an outlet for their distress, the human spirit will find a way to make itself heard. Sometimes, that sound is a song of revolution, and sometimes, for reasons we may never fully understand, it is the sound of a meow, echoing in the holy silence of the night. But now, as our story gently fades, you might feel a sense of peace settling over you. The long and winding path we have walked together has reached its quiet end. The shadows in the convent have grown still. The last echoes of that strange choir have dissolved into the past, and all that is left is the deep and comfortable quiet of this present moment. There is nothing more to explore, nothing more to understand. There is only the feeling of rest, a gentle heaviness in your limbs, a soft slowing of your breath. You can allow your mind to drift now, to float away from the story and into the soft, welcoming landscape of your own dreams. The nuns have found their silence, and now you can find yours. Our narrative has reached its peaceful end. It's okay if you're still here with me. Feel free to press play on another journey, or simply enjoy this deep and comfortable quiet. Good night.